Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you all for coming out here this evening. As I mentioned a little earlier, this is our first of 4 planned community meetings to talk about our CFD or Mello-Roos program. So when we talk about Mello-Roos and CFDs on this side, we use those words interchangeably. Mello-Roos was the actual name of the act that created community facilities districts. So CFD means Community Facilities District, and so you'll hear us initially introduce Mello-Roos and then revert to the term CFD. So we'll be kind of interchanging that way. When you came in, hopefully everybody was able to pick up a little packet, which has got a little agenda on it, and we have a lot of ground to cover. So we wanted to try to provide you an idea about how we're going to process and work through this. The CFD program is a very complex program, especially as built here in Beaumont. And so there's been a lot of work and time spent trying to pull together the information to be able to analyze what we have, in addition to looking at strategies to try to modify the program to provide some savings moving forward. The city's had a lot of spinning plates in the air, I think, as most of you may know. And so the last 6 months we've been working to bring fruition to a number of key issues. For example, WRCOG, we had a major claim against the city. We've got that resolved. That brought the city into a stable financial position, which is fantastic because now operationally we've got a good financial foundation to move forward with. So we're working well there. But we've got other things that we're working on. This is the next major plate that we're trying to address. And you'll see tonight really the culmination of a lot of work, the primary of which was reconciliation. The record keeping, the past practices of managing the dollars and looking at how those were coming in, I would say probably weren't following the best management practices. So we've been in the process of restructuring, pulling that together. And so there'll be a little bit of discussion about that tonight. So financially, again, we've resolved some issues. Some of those other plates, we're getting off the spins, so we're getting ready to get going. We're starting now to get into a lot more detail, of which this is one of those pieces, but there's still the need to grow public facilities. So when we look at the needs of the city growing on into the next 5, 10 years and beyond, we have to think about more of those details. We have public facilities that need to happen. We've talked about a West Side Fire Station. That's still a very valid need. The fire services, fire staffing has to grow with that. Police staffing, as we're taking on more parks and facilities this year, there's more staffing and costs associated with that. So there's a big balance of needs and issues that we're starting now to get down and start to deal with, and that's what normal cities do. And so that's where we're headed. That's what we're doing. If you look on your map, you'll see really a pretty complex schedule, and this really looks and kind of gives you a map for what the next 3 meetings, this meeting, what the next 3 look like. And you'll see IAs, and if you came in, you saw a number and you saw a place and you picked up a card that corresponded with a color on the map. That's because you're physically located within a little, service or improvement area. So our CFD district is basically citywide, and then each portion of our neighborhoods or subdivisions are within an independent area that has independent assessments and facilities that are funded through that specific area. So when you look at the overall financial structure of that, it gets pretty interesting. So when you also look at it, each one has a little bit different structure. It's a little different position in terms of how it's financially set up today. If you look at the next page, you'll see a map. And that shows you all the IAs, so all the sub-areas of CFD 93-1 that we're targeting to look at how to address for savings. So you can kind of get a picture about the different sub-areas, all the different things that are out there, and the different strategies that have to be contemplated for each one of the sub-areas. And again, we've got our experts here tonight that will help us work through there. One thing that I think is important to note when you look at the long-term needs of the city, if you look at this next sheet, it's an HDL. HDL is a consultant that helps across the state. Cities look at economic conditions. They look at property tax calculations, forecast, economic forecasting, those types of things. But this gives you an idea how your tax dollar is broken out. So if you look at a tax dollar that's collected in the city of Beaumont, this is where your money goes. It goes to all these specific places. So out of that dollar, about a little under 8.5 cents of that actually goes towards the city's general fund. And then general fund is the thing that operates police and fire and animal control and operating this building, administration, parks and rec fall under the general fund. So that generates about $3.5 million in property taxes for the city. And so that's about 11.5% of what it takes to operate the general fund. So the rest of it comes from funds and fees and other things that are collected throughout the city and throughout the year. But I think that's important to note. And one key thing you'll notice where you see ERAF, that actually is a portion of local property taxes that the state of California takes from our local tax bill that goes to augment educational spending. That happened in 1992 when the state was experiencing a severe financial drought. So out of your tax bill, so out of that dollar, about 25 cents through those ERAF funds are actually collected and go to the state for education. So the state also establishes what our tax assessment or tax rates are moving forward year to year. So that tax rate is really set. It's established in Sacramento, and then that's the dollar that we have to deal with in terms of your property taxes. And so there's really no discretion at the local level to adjust that tax rate that's there. So what that means is the city has to begin looking at alternative ways to try to generate revenues that allow the city to cover those things that are needed for the things that we talked about. And so fees, the other things, CFDs are a part of that. And were created to provide a basis for cities to have new development, provide an equitable share that goes back into providing the services and infrastructure to serve new development. That's the concept of it, and that's the basis behind it. So your CFD assessments are special assessments that go in and above this. So based on the limits of your regular property tax, it's very difficult for that tax to grow and keep up with the demands that a city like Beaumont's going to see. We have a good team here tonight to present to you these very complex issues. Albert Webb and Associates is the city's special tax consultant. We have Heidi Shope here. Heidi is the director over municipal finance. Richard Wall is our finance manager. They're the ones that actually calculate our assessments and help us administer the CFD programs throughout the city. Urban Futures, Inc. is here. We have a representative. They're a municipal consulting firm that works and helps the city. They do strategic planning, financial analysis, and special kinds of studies. Michael Bush is the CEO with Urban Futures. Piper Jaffray is a public finance consultant that's been in and helping us to analyze the bonds and the debt that we currently have loaded into our CFDs. Katie Koster is a managing director for public finance. She's here with us tonight. And then Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Roth is our bond counsel. Brian Forbath and Lauren Chan are here with them tonight. They've been analyzing, and they'll be instrumental in helping us administer and look at refinancing and take that through the legal channels. So, Brian, Lauren, thank you very much. One thing you'll note is that I didn't introduce any council members tonight. They're not here, and that's out of really a need for council to take a step back. They live in the CFDs. They are impacted directly by any decisions made for that. And so, for public purposes and to really try to eliminate any kind of other problems or conflicts of interest, they're staying away. We're going to provide them feedback in the various types of input that we get through these meetings to council, and then they'll look at that. We are planning to get through our meetings by the 10th of this month, and we are planning to report to council on the 16th, at least an initial report back from the results of our meetings tonight. I will tell you, all your council desperately wanted to be able to attend each and every of these meetings that they could get to, so they apologize for not being here. Again, the purpose is we're going to review the current CFD Melrose program. We're going to look and present the various options we have for restructuring to achieve savings. And then there's a portion that we need your feedback. There's some cards that you picked up, and they're kind of color-coded. The purpose of those cards is really to provide us some of your thoughts and your direction on some of the discretionary elements of the program. If you look, we're structured to look at the refinancing first and get to discretionary a little bit later. And that discretionary is really where we need to hear, from our community and look and where we decide where we're going to go. For public information, we're doing digital recordings of each of these meetings. They'll be posted online at the conclusion of the meetings. The PowerPoint presentation that you're going to see tonight will be posted online as well. So that'll be there. And then after we conclude the final meeting, we're going to have a little online survey that really kind of gets into some of those discretionary uses. So you'll be seeing links going out for that. It's a SurveyMonkey instrument, so you'll be able to click on online and take and give input that direction, as well as any input you want to give us tonight. With that being said, one other plug. You'll notice a little flyer that was there. It's for the general plan update that the city got going a couple months back. So we also have an online survey available to begin to gather some information. You have an opportunity to sign up to receive emails and receive updates on that. So your participation in that would be greatly important to us as we move forward with updating our plan. So with that, Rich, if I could turn it to you to begin to discuss the next part of the meeting.
Thank you, Todd. Can everyone hear me okay? Perfect. My name is Rich Wall with Aubrey Webb Associates. We're the city's special tax consultant, as Todd mentioned. Wanted to just share briefly with you our history from the firm's perspective. We've been providing special tax and assessment consulting services for over 40 years. We have several clients in Southern California and Riverside County specifically with CFD programs equal to and larger than the city of Beaumont. So we do have a significant amount of experience in what it takes to administer such a CFD program as the city itself. Specific about myself, I will tell you up front, I am not the greatest public speaker, so I apologize in advance. I'll try to make this as painless as possible for everybody. And so with that being said, I'll jump right into the presentation. We're going to switch off, so I'll do part of the presentation. I'm going to hand it off to another part of the team, and then we'll kind of go back and forth. So essentially the beginning here, and I'm on the third slide, the California statistics. Uses of CFDs in California. Basically, CFDs are used throughout the state. It is nothing specific to the city of Beaumont, and so what we have here is just some metrics to show you how that's utilized. So statewide, there are nearly 900 agencies that utilize CFDs. There are approximately 1,400 separate bond issuances with a little over $16 billion in debt outstanding. And so we look at Riverside County specifically, there's 40 agencies, a little over 300 separate CFDs, and a little under $3 billion. So you can see that it's a trend. It's statewide. It's nothing specific that's done in Beaumont. This is a common practice. When we talk Beaumont specifically, Beaumont does have one massive CFD. CFD 93-1, as all of you are aware, has multiple improvement areas. Those improvement areas also have separate taxes inside those, and I'll go into that in detail. But when you add them all up, you have about 72 different improvement areas. So it's quite a robust program you guys have. We've recently created 4 new standalone CFDs, and when we look back to see how many of those CFDs or improvement areas exist today, there are 29 that have bonds outstanding. And then just at the end of 2015, there was just over $200 million outstanding. So I wanted to just give you a background briefly on the CFD overview. And now what we'll do is I'm going to jump into a little more of the specifics and how it relates to Beaumont. So for this presentation, we're going to talk facility CFD. That's the biggest line item that you see on your tax bill as it relates to the CFD. There's the services and the facilities, but just to touch basically on facilities, facilities finances the acquisition or construction of public infrastructure, public improvements. It issues bonds, and it has a maturity date. That maturity date essentially means that someday it's going to expire and that tax will go away. The second line item that you'll see in our tax bills is services. That funds the ongoing operation and maintenance of things like the landscaping of parkways, medians, parks, street improvements, street sweeping, street lights, things of that nature. That's an ongoing tax. It will last as long as the agency provides those services. Another way to say it's going to last forever. Those types of improvement areas or that tax cannot issue bonds, so there's no debt associated with that. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're not going to talk services. We're going to talk the facilities, but I just wanted to cover that in general for everyone's knowledge. So on the next slide, we have a very long definition, the special tax requirement. Essentially, this is a definition that was taken out of what's known as a rate and method of apportionment, or an RMA. An RMA has been voted on and approved when each of your improvement areas were created. That RMA has the tax rates, and it has the land use classifications, and it defines how those properties are going to be taxed. You're going to hear me use two terms that are from the RMA throughout this presentation. One is the special tax requirement, and the second is the assigned tax rate. So those two are defined and set in this rate and method of apportionment. So going back to the special tax requirement, I will not read this all to you guys, but essentially it's a budget. It's how to create a budget. And I've summarized that on the next slide. And we show the line items that are included. When you look at a budget, much like a budget in your household, there's items that you have to include that add up to an expense, and you have to pay that expense. And so essentially, perfect. So essentially, what that budget looks like is there's items that are included in there that the city has no discretion. They have to be levied. They have to cover obligations that have already been set. There's one line item in there that the city does have some discretion on, and that's the future facilities. So as we go through this budget, I'm going to touch on all of them listed here on the top. We have debt service payment. So debt service is essentially just like you make your monthly mortgage payment. There's principal and interest due. Unlike making the payment every month, the city has to make it twice a year. So we will enroll at the beginning or in the middle of the year in August what we need to pay that full payment for the following year. So in March they pay interest, in September they pay principal and interest. So that's what the debt service represents. Administrative expense is a fee that's charged to cover the administrative activities that are required to calculate and enroll the taxes, complete the annual reporting that are required by the various regulatory agencies. Delinquency reserve is an amount that's actually collected and to anticipate delinquent properties. It varies from improvement area to improvement area. It's based on the actual rates from the previous year. And then you have the future facilities. And that future facilities could be used for the construction or acquisition of public improvements. And that's the discretionary part that we're going to be talking about, focusing on this presentation. So an option moving forward here is actually reducing the future facilities. So if we reduce the future facilities that we enroll each year, we reduce the special tax requirement. That special tax requirement translates into your individual property bills. So lower tax requirement, lower tax for all the property owners. So the next slide. Not all improvement areas are created equally. So we have to approach this on a case-by-case basis. What that basically means is we need to look at each of the improvement areas and apply a test to them. So if the improvement area is eligible to have a reduction in special tax requirement, it needs to meet two requirements. One, it would need to be fully bonded, and the second, it would need to be fully developed. I actually said that backwards, but both are still required. If the answers are yes to both those questions, then it would be eligible for a reduction in the special taxes. If it's not, unfortunately, it would need to stay at the assigned rate. And the reasons for that can be contractual obligation with the developer to levy at the assigned rate. But most importantly, what we do is we strive for a consistent tax rate. What we don't want to do one year is have a tax rate up here, then give you a breakdown here, and then have to go back up the next year, creating fluctuations. As many of you have an impound account, I'm sure you wouldn't like to have your mortgage payment changed each year. So we strive for a consistent tax each year. So the next slide basically shows the results of this review. We look to see what improvement areas are eligible. So we have 6 improvement areas here today that were included in the scope of this meeting, 16, 17A, BC, 19A, and 19C. So 5 of those improvement areas are eligible for a reduction in the special taxes. 17C, who is not, though fully developed, there have been no bonds issued. So that improvement area will continue to be levied at the assigned rate. Those funds will be collected and held, and when bonds are eventually issued, those funds that have been collected will be applied towards that. So you will actually have a smaller bond issuance, which also translates into a lower tax requirement for you. So it's not that your dollars are lost, it's just they're being postponed. There's a true up once all the bonds are issued. Additionally, what's in this table is something we'll talk about throughout this presentation, is the fund balance. So the city has gone through and looked to see what funds are available and applied them back to each of the improvement areas, as I'll get into on the next slide here, of the past accounting of the CFD funds. So traditionally, the city had one account with these 72 improvement areas paying into it, and they would pay its expenses from it. But there was no way to track which improvement area did what and had what expense. And so the city took an effort to clean that up. We went back, we looked back several years, we went through and created budgets, and then we tried to allocate into different buckets where these funds that are sitting on hand with the city today, where they have came from and who they should be credited to. And that'll be the point of this conversation later on, is to determine what do you want to do with those funds, as the city manager had mentioned before. Just continuing through here real quick, I'll point out that the various buckets include debt service payments, as we talked about, estimated funds for prepayments that have been collected, future facilities, DIF fees, debt service coverage, a reserve, and then the actual discretionary part, the remaining balance. So the city moving forward has created individual accounts for each of these improvement areas, each of these CFDs. So at any point in time moving forward, if asked, they would be able to answer how much funds are on hand and what is credited to each of those improvement areas. So there's no more of this one bucket, one pool of funds. The next slide is just additional definitions. It's clarifying on what each of those buckets that I described before include. Not every improvement area will have a line item for each one of these. It varies. But just to go through these quickly, debt service we talked about, estimated prepayments. So there's been properties that are prepaid. The city has some funds left from those that have been allocated back to those improvement areas for use. The future facilities we talked about being held to offset bond issuance or to pay cash to construct facilities. There's DIF fees. It's basically a development impact fee that have been deferred by certain developers. The debt service coverage is simply, it impacts the two bonds, which is included in 8 improvement areas, but it's the difference between what was collected and what was needed to pay the authority. So those dollars have been identified and then credited back to those improvement areas. There's some funds being held out in a reserve, so the city can still go through and determine any unknown obligations. These funds would be allocated for that. Once that's determined that there are no any additional obligations, they would may be available to use as well. And then the last part, and the most important part, is the remaining balance. So that's the part that the city has discretion to talk to you about, although subject to change pursuant to something unforeseen happening, but this is what we've determined so far. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Bush from Urban Futures to talk about the refunding portion of the presentation, and then I'll come back up and discuss how we apply that and bring it all home for you guys.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be before you all tonight. I've been involved with the city since the bad guys left town, and so it's nice to finally get to this point where we could talk about giving something back. It's been a goal of mine personally since I've been engaged here to get to this point and then to see it through. For my presentation tonight, we're only going to be talking about one improvement area. I think Richard kind of went over that a little bit, and Todd did as well. So we're going to be talking about improvement area 19C. 19C represents about $16.5 million of outstanding bonds. And as Richard covered in his presentation, there's currently outstanding bonds of about $200 million. Program-wide, we're going to talk about $16.5 million here, but the other meetings, including this one, will total $100 million. So we're going to look to refund half of the outstanding debt at a lower interest rate so that you pay less on your annual taxes. That's the essence of why we're here. Next slide, please. We want to talk a little bit about policy considerations. I think as Richard kind of talked through some of the accounting aspects, we do our best to follow government standards, GFOA standards specifically. And so when we look at the opportunities here, in addition to the test that Webb and Associates performed, we also want to make sure that we're following specific rules, industry standards. So we want to make sure that there's enough savings moving forward. And so the standard is about 3%. The reason why that's important is there are costs to financing. Similar to when you buy your house, you pay points, you pay fees. We want to make sure that if you're going to pay for refinancing, that there's a benefit to actually doing other than paying the fees. And so this is such a threshold for that to make sense to you. We're going to look at a couple other things. I think Richard covered some pay-go will be included in our discussion. That's calculated into our assumptions going forward. We're going to be looking at creating a level of debt service that makes sense. I think over the last year I've heard a lot of people are concerned with the escalating taxes. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we have an opportunity to remove anything that's restrictive in the loan documents through a refinancing. So we'll look at that as well. A couple of options that when we look at, the transactions that were issued here, the bonds specifically, were all done, I think, as 30-year transactions, pretty standard process. Beaumont is no different in that regard. On a go-forward basis, we want to look at every opportunity that we have to structure the bonds in a way that makes sense for the people that pay them. So we're going to look at certain call provisions that make sense. Most of these bonds have 20 years or maybe some a little more or some or less of duration still remaining. So we'll look at call provision that makes sense. Bonds that have more than 20 years or somewhere in the 20-year range will have a call period of about 10 years. That's a pretty standard call. We could look at tiered calls or even intermediate calls. The call date, meaning when you can actually refinance the bonds again without having to pay a premium to a bank, allows us to look at the opportunity to refinance debt again. The reason why you might want to look at that, the further out your debt goes, the risk is higher, obviously. So if your debt's 30 years, you pay a higher interest rate out in that 30th year. So each time the duration of the bonds gets shorter, we want to refinance them so that you pay the actual risk associated with that. So if the bonds are shorter term, your risk is a little less, your interest rate's a little bit lower. So we look at all the call provisions as part of this process too. And we want to make sure that we structure them so that we avoid any prepayment premium. So without premium would be ideal. Next slide, please. The city has in addition to its very large issuance of bonds, the 200 plus million, there was a couple that were done as standalones. There were a couple done in pools. And I'm going to describe those very briefly because we're going to follow something very similar in our process here. There are several bonds that were issued with multiple improvement areas. So it could be in your development, it could be in other developments, and they were all issued together. Those are typically referred to as, we're going to call those pooled. You can also do a standalone where improvement area 19C goes out all by itself and solicits proposals for rates for bonds to ensure that we can look at each individual credit. What we plan to do here is a little bit differently. You can turn it to the next slide because I think this is going to fit in. We have a lot of different bonds that we're going to look at. And each improvement area has a different credit characteristic, has different lien to value ratios, meaning the value of your improvement area is higher than maybe other ones, and the debt may be lower. It could be that you have a lower delinquency rate, meaning more people pay their taxes on time than in other improvement areas. You're obviously a built-out community, whereas some may be a little less mature. So when we go out and we solicit for banks to purchase these bonds in a refinancing scenario, we're going to follow what's referred to as a private placement process. The current bonds were issued through a public offering. Basically, investors throughout the United States, throughout the world can buy Beaumont bonds. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to reach out to a lot of banks. I have a list in front of me. It looks to be about 20 different banks. And they're big banks that probably we've all done business with, Bank of America, Bank of the West, GE Capital, Key Bank, Rabobank, Sterling National Bank. We even got a bank in here from Texas for Todd, Texas Capital. Our plan is to solicit 19C to all these banks and get them to bid on buying the debt. In other words, we want the lowest interest rate we can possibly get. We're going to bid all of them out, 19C as well as all the other improvement areas, individually, so we can see what comes back. And then based on the input we get back from the banks, we can see if we can pool them into credit clusters. So like deals with similar interest rates get pooled together. It's a little bit more efficient on the city side. It lowers the cost of borrowing, which lowers your cost of repaying the debt. But it also allows us to truly bid out the opportunity and to get the lowest rate possible by soliciting lots of different banks. $100 million is a lot of debt to issue through this process. It will be done in multiple tranches, possibly. We have a couple banks that are interested in large amounts of the debt, $50, $60 million, but that's not going to get them all done. And so we may get to some process where we have to evaluate which ones get done and how. And so we're going to certainly look at that as one of the opportunities, but it all really depends on which banks that come back. We've had very good dialogue with several of the banks. I've got a call recently as yesterday from a bank. I know that Katie, who's going to speak next, is getting calls from one banker in particular that keeps asking about the timing. They're obviously very interested. From a credit perspective, the CFDs are pretty solid credit. Throughout the community, the delinquency rates are really low. People are paying their taxes on time. There's lots of coverage, meaning the amount they can tax versus the amount that they are taxing provides some assurance that the city can implement the program accordingly. But our goal, obviously, is to lower your tax burden as much as that we possibly can. And we believe, combined with some of the other items that Richard will speak to, I believe, a little bit later regarding public facilities and future capital, that we can do that. So with that, I want to turn it over to Katie Coster from Piper Jaffray. She's going to function as the placement agent in this transaction, and she's going to speak specifically to her initial analysis in regarding 19C.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see such a big turnout. We know that this is of significant interest to everyone. I want to start by giving you a little bit of my background as well. I'm probably one of the newer players here. We were solicited to come and help the city of Beaumont based on the firm's experience in land-secured financing in particular. Piper Jaffray, my employer, is and has been ranked one of the top 2 underwriters in this very unique type of public finance for well over 10 years. Myself, I got involved in the industry about 25 years ago. I actually worked initially with the county of Riverside in the 90s when they were struggling with a large amount of debt during the recession prior to the Great Recession. And I was tasked with putting together a workout team to try and restructure the debt for the county, which ended up also affording quite a bit of savings to property owners who were going through some difficult times at that point. So I do have a significant amount of experience in this space. I did want to preface that although we're only going to be talking about Improvement Area 19C today, because of the credit characteristics of that improvement area and the debt that's outstanding on it, as well as the meeting of the optional provision tests that were talked about a little earlier, the plan is that as some of these other improvement areas, as the debt matures, we're going to be monitoring that debt as well, so that at the earliest possible opportunity, we can go in and refund that as well. So that is the overall future plan. Can we go to skip 2 slides, please? Yes, right there. Okay, so specifically to Improvement Area 19C. 19C actually has 3 separate series of debt currently outstanding, 2 of which are refundable under today's program, and 1 which is going to need to be left outstanding because of the fact that its first optional call provision is so far in the future that a refunding today creates actually negative savings. And under the statute, we're not allowed to incorporate that into the overall program. So we'll be refunding the 2006A and 2008A bonds as part of this program. As you can see from the slide, this is very small print, and I'm not going to go into this level of detail, but This really just is meant to show you the par amounts outstanding in each of the individual maturities and how high the debt is, the coupons on those bonds now. So on the long end for the 2006 A's, they go out as high as 5.35%. And on the 08s, it's almost 7%, which, based on the current market, is very high. And so both of these were very strong candidates for being able to provide a significant amount of savings. At the bottom, you see what I referred to a little earlier as an optional call provision. I think Mike went into that a little earlier, and this is just the terms that were set up when the bonds were initially issued, which dictate to us when we can actually call the bonds through a refunding for savings. Next. Okay, so this is a lot of information. I'm going to summarize it quickly. Again, on the left in the table, you see the two separate series of bonds outstanding. The final maturity for these bonds is 9/1/36, and we will in no way through this program be extending the term of the debt. We will have, and do have now, debt service reserve funds on hand, which are there as part of the initial program in case there's delinquencies. We have the ability to draw on those funds to make sure the debt service is paid. Those balances remain there, and they will be used as a source of funds when we refund the bonds. As a point of context for the annual special tax, this improvement area paid in fiscal year 16-17 roughly $2.375 million in their overall levy. To the right and below, you'll see how that was broken out between the different pieces of the overall levy: debt service, administration, delinquency reserve, and future facilities. And on a per parcel basis, the total was roughly $3,500. Of that, the debt service component was about $3,000. And so when I'm talking about savings, as we get into a little bit more detail, the savings only applies in this context against that debt service component. You're currently paying about 90% of the max special tax as of fiscal year 16-17, and the intent is, of course, to bring that down. In this particular rate and method of apportionment, there is a 2% escalator on the debt, which basically means that every year the assigned special tax has the ability to increase by 2%. When we look at refunding the bonds, we're also going to be looking at the credit characteristics of your particular improvement area, and the banks will be using these credit characteristics to determine what the interest rate is that they're going to bid. The stronger the underlying credit characteristics, the lower the yield will be on their bid. In this particular case, we have what's referred to as a value to lien ratio, and it basically is the value, the assessed value at the point that the ratio is taken. In this case, fiscal year 16-17 value for the property in the district was over $200 million, and you divide that by the amount of debt that will be outstanding on those parcels. And in this case, we have a value to lien ratio that is about 8.4 to 1. Now, the industry threshold for an investment grade credit is between 10 and 15 to 1. So this is industry-wide standards, not a spectacularly strong credit from a value stand alone, but it is very diversified. We have over 669 developed parcels and a very low delinquency rate. Of those 669 parcels, only 8 at this point in time are delinquent. So those credit factors pulled together in our initial discussions with banks, we received an indicative rate, which is preliminary and subject to an entire credit process that banks go through. But at the time that we asked, it was about 4.14%. So significantly lower than what was on the previous slide and what's outstanding today. Now, there's a couple of different things that we'll be doing within the context of the refunding. We will be using those prior debt service reserve funds, which I referred to earlier, as part of the escrow to lower the cost. We are also going to be getting some efficiencies because this is a private placement. The cost of issuance will be lower. We do not have to print an official statement. We do not have to go and get a rating. There are a variety of other costs that are lower in a private placement, which will be to the benefit of the property owners. And the specific refunding scenario, which I'll show you on the next page, does incorporate the 2% escalator, which I referred to earlier, and is about a 5 basis point premium to what we might get if we were to go into a public offering type of sale. So if we could turn the page. So the top graph is meant to show you from this point in time at the refunding to when the bonds mature, both the levy itself, which is the blue bar, that's an average annual levy, and the red bar, which is basically the savings that would be produced each year on debt service. And you can see that what we've done is applied savings in a uniform manner so that each year the savings that has resulted is applied and allocated on a level basis. But because of that escalator, your levy will still continue to go up slightly. It'll just be at a reduced rate. So what does this mean in numbers? We're looking at selling about $16.5 million in debt. The reserve fund is going to be reduced. Actually, let me correct myself. The reserve fund actually will have to be funded at 100% of the requirement because of the fact that you have one series of bonds that needs to be left outstanding, and that is what's termed parity debt. So we have to keep all of the same legal provisions of that debt outstanding. Net present value savings is going to be in excess of 13%. And annual savings of about $218,000. Applied across 669 parcels, that represents about $325 per year per household. Now, in the rate and method of apportionment for this improvement area, there are different classifications of homes, and so different classifications of homes are currently paying different taxes. So that $325 is an average. Some houses will see a little more and some will see a little less. But it should be roughly the same 13% per household. So that is our hope based on indicative rates today. And to the extent that we can get an aggressive pricing, we hope to reduce it even more. And with that, I will finish up.
Okay, so I'm back. We're almost done, and we're on to the best slides now. We're going to talk about how we implement that and what the savings means for you guys. So the next slide, the results. So what I have on here is basically it's a summary of all 6 of the improvement areas. We talked about budgets extensively here. I'm just going to run through this table. Starting from the top, we have the descriptions. We talked about eligibility. So this shows the 5 with a yes and the 1 without. We show the number of parcels per improvement area. As we move down the budget here, we show the debt service, admin, delinquency, future facilities that we talked about before. I apologize. I want to make note, this is an example. So what we did is apply the savings to your fiscal year 16, 17 special taxes. They've already been enrolled. We can't change those. So what we're doing is we're illustrating if we did this today, what we're talking about here today, last year, this is how it would have translated on your tax bill that you've already received and you're paying on. The 17-18 taxes are going to be calculated soon, and what we're talking about here will be applied to that. So just going through an example, I'm going to pick improvement area 16. We started with a $3,161 annual tax, and that's the middle part. It says average levy per parcel. When we're talking just specifically with the removal or reduction of the future facilities, we're going to take half. So the city enrolled $159,591 as deemed future facilities. If we cut that in half, we would apply roughly $80,000 in savings, which I'm in the yellow boxes now. So that would translate into $332 on average savings per household in this improvement area. So at the end of the day, what was once $3,161 now becomes $2,829. And so, of course, there's fine print everywhere. I just want to make note, as Katie mentioned, these are average savings per household. So some houses have a higher tax, some have a lower. So their actual savings will be higher and lower depending on the class of property that you are in this improvement area. I won't walk through the other improvement areas, but essentially you can see the same. There's savings applied to each with the exception of 17C. The next slide sums them up for both. So we talked about refunding, we talked about the reduction in future facilities. So in this example, there's only one that gets both, and that's 19C. So if we're just going to jump over to the bottom right here, we show that we remove half the future facilities for $141,000. We apply the annual savings. This savings is going to be slightly different than what you saw on the previous slide because the $218,000 Katie mentioned is the annual average savings for the entirety of the remaining debt. This is just 1 year. This would be the first year. So total, there would be $360,000 in savings, or roughly $539 reduction in the property's taxes for that. So what was once $3,551 becomes $3,012. So this is the type of program that the city has been working on and implementing to provide that long-needed relief to the property owners, and so you're seeing this come to fruition now. This is what we're working on to move forward. The last slide that I have that I'll cover here today is the authorized facilities. So we talked about funds that had been backed out and provided on an individual improvement area basis previously in the slide. This list is what those funds can be applied for. So when each of your improvement areas were formed, there were legal documents that were drafted and accepted and voted on through council. And they set the stage of what the funds that are collected from you each year from the property CFD tax basis, they can only go to these items. And so what we've done is summarized here. You'll notice some have notations as to specific improvement areas, but high level, you have the opportunity, or these funds can be used for things such as transportation systems. So think roads, streets, bridges. You know, if there's a road that you're aware of that you wanted to be improved that just hadn't been repaved in a long time, funds can be used for that. Traffic signals, street lighting, things like that. There's also other improvements facilities such as the sewer treatment, West Side Fire Station. You'll note on here there's improvement area 16 and 19 only. This was specifically spelled out in those improvement areas. But then the very next line item is public safety facilities for 17. So you can make the distinction that it would be a fire station or a police station, something of that nature. Storm drains or domestic and recycled water systems, and then parks. So this is going to apply only to improvement area 17. Has the ability to fund either a regional or community level park, open space, and trails. So again, this list is the kind of the wish list of where these funds can be used. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the city manager, who will talk a little bit more about the next steps and what we're doing here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I think at this point, I'm sure y'all have a lot of questions, maybe one or two questions out there. I'm sure there's some things that we didn't touch on. But one thing I would like to stress, and, since I've been here, I've heard a lot of comments about people asking about prepayment. I'd like some people like to prepay the balance of the fees that are out there. The city hasn't been processing prepayments over the last couple years. And the reason for that is that the reconciliation needed to happen. We really need to be able to determine how to calculate that. And without running these analysis and running these financial reconciliations, it really wasn't possible to really calculate that correctly and fairly. Now that we're finishing up with these reconciliations and we're looking at this restructuring, we have the opportunity now to be able to get back into a prepayment program. And so part of what we're contemplating is once we get our refinancing and reduction strategies in place and approved by council, than having a fully implemented repayment program there. And I would really recommend, and we can calculate repayments, and council can establish a policy for that. But we at staff would really recommend that y'all hold off on that until we see what the savings can be achieved first, so that when you do get a chance to prepay, you can save a little bit extra on that as well. So. But I know that was a question that was out there and a concern. We're killing a prepayment program, and we're not. But we have frozen it because of all the reconciliation and cash issues and accounting issues we needed to resolve. So one thing I would like to stress as well is, with the group meeting tonight, there's only one IA that we can do, and it would qualify for refinancing of a portion of that debt. As our other IAs mature, there will be other opportunities to refinance, and we'll be looking at that and monitoring that and bringing that to council to further try to achieve those savings as we move forward. And this first approach, this first run through this, is probably going to take 2 to 3 years to be able to get all of those areas approved and refinanced. So I think those are some key elements that just wanted to address up front. With that, we can handle this a couple different ways. We have some microphones if people would like to come up and ask questions, and we'll turn it to our team to try to address. Thank you.
Am I the only person who has a question?
I'll bet you we have a line.
That convinces me that I am really confused. On the slide of savings comparison, I'm sorry, Katie, did I remember that right? It was Katie's presentation. I'm looking, I don't know if you can bring that slide back up, but there. The graph at the top starts, it looks like about 1,600 of the tax for 2016. And I understand that the savings is a flat line all the way across. But if I'm looking at that correctly, between 2016 and 2036, the 1,600 becomes 2,500, which is in essence a 60% increase in our tax. Am I reading that correctly?
I think that you're reading the graph correctly. I would have to do the 60%. It is a 2% escalator per year, so it's going to be 2% on the base each year.
If you start at 1,600, 900 is a hair less than 60%.
Yes.
Right? That doesn't sound like 2% a year to me. Maybe that's where I don't understand why in the next 20 years, because I'm not anywhere near 1,600 with mine personally, so mine's going to go out the roof in 20 years. Why is it going up that much? Who decides how much it goes up?
Yeah, hi, this is Brian Florbath from Stratton-Yalka, the city's bond counsel. So when each of the community facilities districts was established, there was a vote at that time of the eligible voters in the CFD. And at that time, for just about all of these districts, it was a developer-driven district. And at that point in time, the special taxes were set with a 2% escalator. And so that has been recorded on your property. It's something that is there, and unfortunately you all will have to live with at this time. I think we've looked at and thought about ways to try to use the savings to offset that escalator. But the issue with that is that if you apply the savings to reduce the escalators in the back years, it really doesn't provide savings to the residents now. It provides savings to somebody who may own the home 12 or 15 years from now, and that's may or may not be you all in the room. And so the council had directed us to look at that. And so we've looked at that and analyzed it, and I don't think the council's made a decision on it. It'll ultimately be their decision. But I think they've come to sort of a tentative conclusion that it's best to spread the savings equally throughout the debt so that all residents who live in that house starting now would benefit from the potential savings.
So And again, I'm just trying
Yeah.
to clearly understand. The 2% escalator compounded gets it to about 60%.
Correct.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, and again, these are average savings, and so the issue that we have is that the way the CFDs are structured, there's a debt service payment that has to be addressed, and so those are obligations that are there. If you look at trying to refinance those, and you're refinancing those within the same term, so they would we're not extending the term of those loans out. There is still a debt service obligation that's there. The 2% escalator is a maximum escalator that would need to be set year to year pursuant to the actual debt service that's required that's out there. And it's just a function of what's due and owable and already out there. Well, and this is the first round of refinancing, and these will be callable again at a certain point, and I don't know, maybe every
Standard callability is 10 years, but one of the things that we're asking the banks is to provide us with any additional flexibility that they could do to shorten that. We've seen them do it in 5 years and in 7 years. It does cost a little bit more to the interest rate yield to do that and have that flexibility, but it's certainly something that we're asking for because there may be future savings that can be provided.
And that's that one portion of it. The other that Rich was talking about was what we call the pay-go or the future facility portion. And that's that additional amount that is collected above and beyond what's required for the debt service, in addition to the administration costs, and then the reserves that need to be established. And so that's really where there's additional discretion. The model that you saw anticipated that half of that pay-go or that future facility portion would be eliminated and reduced. And council's options on there would be, hey, do you want to leave that at the rate it is today? Do you want to eliminate altogether, or do you want to reduce that, to some degree? And so what we showed here. That's correct. That's correct. Understand. Well, first of all, the city doesn't build the schools. Okay, that was a set aside that was there by the developer. Okay. No, y'all haven't been assessed dollars to build the school through your CFDs. That hasn't. Well,
Okay, can I say something, please?
Okay, if I can, instead of... No, I mean, I do need people to come to the microphone so everybody can hear the questions.
Okay, yeah, if we could have this
so,
in an orderly fashion, that would be great.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to understand. You were stating that you were trying to spread things out evenly to the future owners and taxes evenly so that everyone gets the savings. But my concern is, okay, why aren't the taxes spread out evenly to everybody that lives in that area? I can move across the way to a new home and pay half the taxes for the same facilities, for the same services. Why not just sell my home and leave the area? That didn't make sense to me.
So the answer to that is that. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll stand up. I'm sorry. Apologize. So the answer to that is when each of the homes was built, when the development was established, there were specific facilities that were supposed to be financed by the CFD, and there was an amount of debt that each of the improvement areas was authorized to issue to pay for those facilities, and that varies by improvement areas. And it also varies on sort of the size of houses and the cost of the houses that were being built in each of these improvement areas. So accordingly, some improvement areas have more debt on them than others. And depending on when the improvement areas were built and the timing of it, they may have lower or higher tax rates. There's not uniform tax rates in anywhere in the city. Every improvement area had its own tax rate that was established at that time. And so the answer is yes, you could move to another neighborhood with a lower tax rate, and that's right. They might have a lower tax rate than what you have in there, and that was based on what was established when the improvement areas were all established. When city manager, no one here was in the room representing the city, but that's how it was done at the time.
Okay, my next question, I guess, would be: you're starting with 19C. I was maybe the second person that moved into our neighborhood, Tire Fairway Canyon. And why aren't they starting with people that have been paying the longest, or starting in those areas where are you trying to hit the most homes, the largest debt?
No, so what happens is each one of the bonds, when they were sold, as Mike and Katie mentioned, were usually sold with what's sort of like a 10-year lockout period before bonds could be refunded. And so out of all of you here in these improvement areas, 19C is the only one today that can be refunded for savings based on the market conditions that are out there. And so the plan would be, in another year or two, is the city manager and everyone's going to be constantly monitoring this, and eventually these other improvement areas will be eligible for refunding, and they will get refunded in the future when there's savings. And it really was based on the timing of when the bonds were issued. So in 19C, some of these bonds were issued in 2004, 2003, and so therefore the bonds are currently callable right now. Some of these other improvement areas, bonds weren't issued until 08, 09, and 010, and so the bonds in those improvement areas will not be refundable really until 2019, 2020, et cetera. And that's the issue of why 19C is being approached first. Hopefully that answers your question. You've been waiting, and I'll go back.
Can we pull up the slide that had the calculation? It was the first part of, hey, these are the things we could control or we couldn't control. It was this, something else. It's in the very beginning. Right there. Go back right there. So the future facilities is crossed out. My question is, and I didn't quite get it from the presentation, is what's actually getting cut? Other than, I understand there's anger and frustration at just the minimal savings being achieved, but what are we losing when we're taking these things out? If we're saying these future facilities are coming out, what buildings, what facilities aren't going to get implemented, or is everything still on the table?
Yeah, so, and I think the question is for most of your CFDs, you're fully built out. Most of the facilities have been constructed. And so I think the city council is now analyzing, is there really a need to be levying these future facilities taxes that their predecessors had been levying? And so the issue is if the determination is that there's really not a need for future facilities for any of these.
So maybe I'll state this as an ask then very directly is there should be a bullet list of this is what's not coming because of this, or there should be a very black and white statement that all facilities have been constructed, the fee and the service is no longer required. Or you're going to miss out on an elementary school in Fairway Canyon, or you're going to miss out on a fire station somewhere else.
So let me just, there's been lots of questions about the school district. None of the special taxes were eligible. I just want to make it clear for everybody in the room. The special taxes that were levied here, none of this goes to the school district. The school was not an eligible facility of
It was just an example.
Yeah,
I know,
but I just
know that's
want
a
to make sure.
sore subject here. I didn't mean to call that out as an item, but just what are we missing? Because there's no free lunch here, and that's what I'm missing is what are we losing by this? Or is this purely a financial play of refinancing to get a lower interest rate and pass on those nominal savings?
Yeah, I think it's for the refundings, it's purely a financial play. For the facilities, and this is what I think the city manager want to talk about in the future is, are there, for certain of your communities, are there park improvements that weren't constructed, or is there some road improvements that aren't constructed, and you all in the neighborhood would really like to see a signal or this road repaved?
And that's all I'm looking for. What's the trade-off?
Yeah, and that's I think that's the purpose of this meeting is to get input from the residents that do you want just your taxes reduced and that's what you want, or do you want the city to take some of this money it's collected and is collecting and put that towards the facilities you want?
And I know there's other residents here, so I'm going to get off, but that was my point is if we're cutting something, what's going away from it? What are we losing as the outcome?
Correct. Yeah. So that's what the city manager is looking for direction and input from. And that's really the purpose of this community meeting is to get input from you all on that.
I'd like to know. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
So I have several questions, and I have a couple of things for the audience to understand. First of all, there's a proposal from the Trump administration to change the SALT federal tax provision, which is essentially your state and local income taxes. So that's something you ought to be thinking about. Some of you might hand standard deductions. Others of you might actually do itemized deductions. If the SALT deduction does go away, you need to be aware that you will not be able to deduct these things from your federal income taxes. So be aware that things could change on you, which right now you might benefit from the deduction, the 25% return on that. You will potentially lose that. The second thing is we have been waiting for years for a fire department. We've been waiting for years for the school to be built and the various stores. We have a frontage road that is incomplete. It's halfway built. It has orange cones on it for, 14 years. Whatever you're telling us is really just more of the same. The other question I have for the city is, why don't you just assign the debt directly to us as individual homeowners? Why don't you get out of the business of being in bonds? You're really terrible at it. And the only people making money on this are the back end, the Piper Jeffries, the various sorts of organizations that are, and granted, they're in business to do this, but why don't you just assign the debt to us and let us put this on our own debt? Then at least we know what we're paying for. And you go pay the bonds off with the loans that the Bank of America is doing. So how's that as an option? Why don't you just give me back my debt? If you can't tell me how much I owe, at least tell me that I can assign the debt to my own home, and then I can deal with it. So those are some things for you to think about, people. A lot can change in the next year. These people aren't doing anything for you. They're not helping you unless they reduce the debt and provide the services that they said they were going to. Don't be fooled.
I just want to say how disappointed I am that you brought all of these people out here for $45 a month. That is such a slap in the face to all of us that have been paying. I've paid well over $35,000 since I moved into my home just on CFDs, which there's nothing to show for it. The city can still not tell me what I owe. I have asked for 2 years to tell me what I personally owe on my CFD. There's no clue. No one can tell me that. That is unacceptable to be talking about doing different things when you can't even tell each of us what we currently owe. You can't keep taking our money without telling us what we owe. $16.5 million for my area is not good enough. And someone suggested selling their home. I'm trying to get out of Beaumont because I'm so sick of this. I can't sell my home because of your debt.
So I think I have a simple question. Your special tax escalator, if I understand you correctly, of 2% per year, this is optional? It was set upon building, right, it was at inception, I get that, but you as a city have the option whether or not to increase ours by 2% a year, and that's discretionary on your part. That's part A, my question. Now, the second part is it seems like you are going to some kind of a length here to save money by refinancing the bonds, by future facility reductions. Whatever the case may be, it seems like you're making a minimal effort to reduce our taxes, yet over here on the other side of the coin, you've got the ability to not do the 2% escalator every year, which when you compound it came up to 60%, and yet you're going to go ahead and do that 2% increase every year voluntarily according to the original documents. Am I understanding that correctly?
No. So let me clarify that. The city does not have an option not to increase the taxes 2%. The bonds were sold with debt service that increases 2% each year.
So that 2% escalator is mandatory?
It is mandatory.
That was my question.
Yeah. So the city's got an obligation, it's got covenants to its investors that it has to collect special taxes sufficient to pay the debt service on its bonds.
So if you redo the bonds, will you lose that 2% escalator clause?
That was the conversation I had at the beginning with the gentleman over here about, whether or not we want to structure the bonds without the 2% escalator. And that is an option that the city could consider doing. Would you let me finish and I could tell you why you may or may not want that as an option, because if you if you get rid of the 2% escalator, there will be no savings to anybody in the room here for several years, for many years. All of the savings will come to the people who own that house 10, 15, 20 years from now. And so that's part of the question that we're here to address, is if that's the direction that people in this room and residents want, then that's what the council wants to hear, because they're considering that. But the council was sort of in the last CFD workshop that we had, it was explained to them that, well, if you got rid of the 2% escalator on the debt, no current resident who's in that CFD will see any savings in the near future. And so do you want to pass on the savings now to current residents, or do you want to pass it on to future residents who may not be here today? And that's the question. And if you all have input on that, well, I'm sure the council would like to hear it.
I suspect everybody in this room is considering selling their home. I know I am. So I think we are all future residents, maybe. I guess it depends on what you're doing for us in the future as well.
And when we talked to council, we did run a model. We showed, I think on 19C, for example, what it looked like refinancing with the model that you saw tonight with those savings and keeping the 2% escalator in. We also ran a model that said, hey, eliminate the 2% escalator and keep the term the same so it still matures at 2036. And so when you look at the average payment, it's $1,500 a month for this year. By restructuring it, doing basically a flat debt service, it goes to $2,000. So this year we go from $1,500 to $2,000. When you look at the tail end, with the 2% escalator, you're at, I think, that $2,500 or closer to $3,000, $2,800. You'd still be at that 2,000 level. So that's the difference that gets implemented by structuring this with an escalator versus without an escalator.
And I don't want to take a double turn, but I think everybody might want to be clued in as to whether or not the new homes that are going in right now in our area, are they going to have the same property tax rates that we are? So their buyers are going to be looking at those homes and won't even take a look at any of our homes because we're at 2.7% overall property tax rate. Are those new developers coming in, buying their fees up front so that they don't have to pass these on to their buyers of these new homes?
If they're building within these IAs, if they're building within and building out these other areas, those are structured just like yours. And as alluded to tonight, the only exception out there is that site that was originally planned for the school, which was carved out. That was exempted from the CFD. So those homes will be sold. They won't be subject to this portion of the CFDs like y'all are for the debt service portion and administration. But their cost, typically the developer would have those costs implemented in. So where y'all are paying your CFD assessment to cover the cost that went into the infrastructure to serve the project, these new lots don't have that, so their costs should be adjusted accordingly. I'm sorry, if you can come to the microphone, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think he was next.
Oh, I'm sorry. And we'll come back to that, okay? I'll come back to that, so go. Yes, sir.
So I'd just like to express a little frustration in that when I moved to Beaumont, I was looking forward to a very nice community that's growing. And probably I should have looked closer. I had no idea that this would be going up at that amount. I'm not sure if it was hidden or if I was just excited to move here and didn't pay attention. But I look at taxes that we have here in Beaumont as a two-headed serpent, because the reality is we have a high base tax and then we have a high Melrose on top of it. And so how does the average family, I'm fortunate, I have a good job and I'm able to afford this, but what is the average family that has 3 or 4 children who's looking at a rate that's going to go up that high? What do you suggest they do?
Again, we are restructuring within the context of what we have. So the debt that's there, the obligations that are there are what we're trying to eliminate and reduce as much as we possibly can. Yeah. And so what we've shown that,
and so that's where I would say the two-headed serpent comes in. Then I think your job is to look at the other side of the taxes, something you may have more control of than you do with the bonds. We've all come from, I shouldn't say all, I'm sorry, many people have been here their whole life. I wasn't. I can tell you past experience. I was paying a third of the property taxes, and I had schools, and I had roads, and I had hospitals, and I had everything that we needed. And somehow we were able to do that with a third of the property tax rate when you add the Melrose and the tax rate. And that's what I think we expect from you as a city manager, is for you to manage it. If you can't manage it on the Melrose, then you should be managing it on the other side. And that's what I would see your role as. Do you see it different?
No, that's what we're doing. And again, as I explained to you earlier, the city's tax assessments are not set locally. There's state statute, there's a process that sets that. So we try to maximize that as much as possible. The tax rate to keep up with the fire stations, to keep up with all the other services, to the other facilities that are wanted and have been discussed, these additional assessments, these special taxes are what's going to really be able to make that happen.
But how did I have everything that I have here without having these special taxes? When they built 1,000 new homes, they had 1,000 new homes providing tax income to the community. So why is it different in California?
Well, the tax structure, the property tax structure here, I'm not sure, but when you came or the time period that you're talking about, but the tax structure, Prop 13, changed all that. So that changed the local taxation process. That changed the way by which the tax rates are calculated and assessed. And so it's a different scenario now than it was.
I was actually here for Prop 13 as well, and the reason for Prop 13 is because the taxes were going through the roof. And so the people voted, let's limit it to this, and the government's going to have to find a way to make it. I had to vote for somebody this time I didn't want to vote for because of this nonsense. And I see that continuing on as we move forward in our political structure. We're going to be looking for people who can do different than has been done throughout the years. Thank you.
When I bought my house, I was one of the first ones in Fairway, and we've been paying on it for over 12 years. The whole point of this whole thing is we're tired of the dangling carrot. I'm trying to be patient in this thing because we keep getting promised, but nobody ever comes up with any numbers. All they come up with is what you're coming up with, and I'm telling you, you've got a lot of hot people here because of the fact that we're looking at $37 when we've all paid over $35,000. It's going to take forever to get that back. Where's the money from the schools? Where's the money for the Stater Brothers? That's what was told to me when I bought my house, because I wasn't going to buy here because of the Mellorews. But they promised me a Stater Brothers. They promised me a school. They promised all this stuff. And what have we got? Nothing. We got debt. That's what we have. We have debt. What my question to you is, you're a new city manager. It's your job to get this thing under control, and we need to see more than $30 a month.
You're trying to make us understand the world of bond finance and Melrose. So for me, that's kind of unfair because it's very complicated. One thing, in 1980 where I live, we started with like you're hearing the word 11, 12 years ago, right, when we started that issuance of the bond. So we think we qualify. Now, 1980, there's a wrinkle. Before Al Kapanicus went to jail, he refinanced 19A at $19 million. And so we thought we were going to and he said he would keep the term at, I'm trying to understand this from a mortgage. It's a 30-year mortgage, and I feel we shouldn't have to extend the term of the mortgage. So right now, we owe $19 million plus, and it's due in 2035. We thought we were going to get, my understanding now, you're forcing us to understand this. My understanding is that when that $23 million originally was going to go for this magic word infrastructure, which is the street system, the sewer system, the utilities, curbs, gutters, sidewalk. We thought all that $23 million was going to go into that. But now we're hearing that maybe it went somewhere else. What if it went to pay for Oak Valley Parkway? Or what if it paid for a street signal across the city? I think part of the frustration is we may have been subsidizing other improvements. Now, if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, okay? You're giving us a sales pitch. You're offering us in 19A, the pitch is, well, we'll take this future facilities, which is supposed to go for our fire station we never got, okay? So here's about $400,000. We're going to apply that to pay off our $19 million in it faster. We're going to kind of retire it faster, okay? But we still have the fire station unbuilt. Where are you going to get the money if you're not going to use it from our facilities? So I don't want to get into this world of finance, but if I wanted to pay off my mortgage, I mean, what I could do is pay it off in 10 years. I've talked to a couple of people in the audience. They're thinking, well, how can we pay this off sooner? Can we pay this off by 2025? Think of it as a mortgage when you go to your mortgage lender. So it's not fair. We don't want to get involved in this. We got better things to do with our life. But the bottom line is, we have a refinance in 2015 that you have to look at. It's law. It was done. It was approved by the big shirts in Wall Street. All the bond underwriters who are making these mansions in Newport Beach and Orange County, making millions because of their training in bond finance. I get that. And also the Wall Street market that they've been talking about. You're soliciting these bids. So I'm stuck with this. I want to work within the terms of finance, but I do think we need to accelerate the pay down. Now, whether $400,000 is enough per year. Another point my last point, I know everybody needs a chance. We've been paying this $400,000 for future facilities for 10 years. So isn't that, let's do the math, is that $4 million we have already paid? Hello? So where did that $4 million go? Why can't that be applied to paying down our balance? So this is the nastiest mortgage that we all have to pay in. And I don't want to pay this mortgage anymore. I want to get it out of our life. So let's get that $4 million back as well. Transparency and accountability, right? You can't say it enough. Okay, I'm done. I'm just in case you're going to respond.
Oh, okay. Well,
just in case. So it was refinanced. The balance is $19 million. Right? You're writing that down?
Do y'all want to talk about
it's
the
19A.
Refinancing structure? Can y'all address part of that question?
And so we may still qualify. Also, when you refinance, the lady before me said, shouldn't we get a removal of the 2% escalator? When you refinance a deal, you want all those owners' terms thrown out. we should have gotten that 2% removed in 2015. She's brought up the point. So if we're going to refinance again, we should look into that again. I guarantee you look into that law long enough and hard enough, we will qualify for a refinance. So anyways, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to try and address your issues as I can individually. The idea of accelerating the debt is something that you could do. The effect of that would be to push. It's the same concept as a 30-year mortgage. If you went from a 30-year loan to a 20-year loan, you would just be paying more up front. It's certainly something within the realm, but again, the property owners here that aren't happy with seeing the savings under a structure that is consistent with what you have today would be, I think, much more disappointed if they were paying more, even for a shorter term. But it is an option.
I was going to say real quickly. So let's assume that we're going to accelerate the payoff. So let's say if we had our mortgage, and let's say, we got a bonus or something. So we're going to pay bigger payments. Like our mortgage is $4,000, but we'll pay $5,000 so we can pay it off in 10 or 20 years, or instead of 30. Okay, so the $400,000 in 19A is apparently trying to do that. Now, what I would say is we also have a service fee. Now, a lot of you disagree with me. That's okay, but there's a service fee which is only like 30% of it's like $300 or $400. That's for the police to come in when we ask them to come in, and the fire when there's a fire, and that's going to go on forever. But I want to pay this sucker off as fast as possible. So I'm asking you right now where you would think we could look to pay it down faster besides that $400,000 carrot you're sticking at us. Okay, and that's my last question.
Okay, so to address that, again, the acceleration is an option, but to do that, it would have to be applied across the entire series of bonds, and so everybody would have to either agree or not agree. We'd go through some process, I would imagine, with the city to determine, the term if it wanted to be shortened and the net effect of that. The other option, of course, is prepayment, which I believe was addressed earlier, that there was not a way to do that over the past 2 years because of the reconciliation that was going on. But once this is cleaned up and the bonds are refunded, every parcel should be able to identify the amount of debt outstanding, and a prepayment calculation should be able to be calculated so that that's an option for individuals.
If the balance goes down in 5 years, our payoff should go down, right? So right now I think it's about $50,000.
If you were to prepay the debt today, then the amount should be less than if you paid it over the full term, because you wouldn't be paying the interest on it.
Okay, I think right now it costs about $55,000 to pay off. So we're averaging about $30,000. If we want to get out of it, you pay $55,000 and you're out, and so you don't have to pay it each month. Okay, so if we pay it down 5 years from now, so like instead of $19 million, we're suddenly down at like $10 million. Does that mean that the payoff amount could go down to $25,000 instead of $55,000? And I think you understand exactly what I'm saying. Don't act like you don't understand what I'm saying, because you do understand. Okay.
Got to calculate.
I mean, if anybody should understand what I'm saying, it's you people, right? Okay. Go ahead.
There should be a way to calculate the outstanding balance every year after a payment has been made. Lump sum anytime. And I think that's what Ty was trying to explain, is that they haven't got to that point yet due to the reconciliation work. But I agree with you. That should be something that should be able to be provided.
Thank you. Wall Street.
I want to make a couple of questions, sir, if you don't mind, before you speak. So I mentioned earlier that I had been involved in the beginning, and I understand your frustration. It is, ironically, and maybe not so ironic, the same frustration we've heard from the other developments. When I first started here, when I started looking at things, I too was angry, even as a consultant. When I looked back at prior documents that were sent to the council, they didn't include a lot of information that's standard, what the interest rate was going to be, how much they were paying in fees. None of that was ever in any of the documents that I saw. What you see now, and partly I think what angers you, is the transparency of the past now coming forward for you today. It's been my job for the last, I don't know, I think 2 years to work with the former city manager, Elizabeth, and now with Todd, to do everything we can to make the Bass situations right. And at this point, this is somewhat what we're left with, and I apologize for that. I think that you've been given a raw deal. Just say it. I believe it. The council did ask for us to look at alleviating that 2% escalator that I've heard in this room. So going forward, not that it affects you, but I will share it with you. Going forward, I don't believe there's been a CFD with a 2% escalator. The council has decided no more. That affects the developers. The reason why the developers want it is when you put that 2% escalator in there, it allows them to finance a lot more. It's about 20% more that they can bond against with the escalator in there. And so it's to their incentive to ask for it. And this community's had a lot of those, and the council's approved a lot of those. So the council asked us to look at the options. So this is a presentation, a slide for 19C that was given to the council a month ago, somewhere around a month ago, answering that question for them. And so as you can see, to the left is a chart that you've already seen. It's very similar. It's a little bit different because the savings numbers have changed because the market interest rates have moved. But over to the right is the option of a level debt payment. And as you can see, what Mr. Forbath, I think, was trying to point out, in order to create a level debt service payment, your actual assessment goes up in the beginning because we're spreading the same amount of debt over a fixed period of time. So under the escalating, debt goes up over that period of time. In order to have it level, your first couple of years go up. So you would actually have an increase in assessment. And as you can see, the savings is really minor and it builds up over time. That is an option for this group. If this group wants that option, the city manager would certainly accept that. The council has asked us to look at it. As Brian pointed out, we didn't think that that would be something this group would be interested in. We know you already pay a lot. The idea of saying pay $500 more to get savings 10, 15 years from now seemed a little bit foreign to us. And so we've presented this one option to you. The pay-go money that you guys all have been paying. So you've probably heard over the years that, we've done some reconciliation work for the city. I think Webb has done some reconciliation work for the city. Our job was to track where all the bond money went. We found almost all of the 260 plus million, but about $50 million of it. That $50 million went into the city coffer, and the city spent it on projects. And then they had someone internally identify where those projects were, and I think they've actually been able to identify them. Going back to the past, there wasn't much transparency into how and where the money went. I understand that that's been the biggest issue here. We've been doing the best that we can to try and figure that out. There are still unmet needs. Part of the work that we are doing on behalf of the city and working with the city manager is we've drafted a financial forecast. It started off as a workout plan. When we were engaged, the city was negative $8 million in cash, had a lot of other problems. We've since worked through that. There's no longer a negative cash in the general fund. And believe it or not, you guys didn't pay for it. We are now the city's been weaned off of CFD money to run. The first time ever, probably the last 8 to 10 years. So no longer are they using your money to run the city, but the facility money is still there. There's still money for the fire station. The issue, I think, with the fire station, candidly, is there's money to build it. There may not be money to operate it. And so that's one of the questions regarding the fire station, but it's always been an issue with the council since I've been here. It's been every community meeting that I've gone to that was important to figure that out. In our workout plan, that is still one of the items that we're presenting to the council. How to deal with capital projects, street and road improvements, and how to build and operate the fire station without relying on Mello-Roos to do it. So we've solved a lot of the other issues, WRCOG settlement, for example, the budget issues. We're left with this one little thing as it relates to the operation. This was the last big thing that we had to really work on to try and fix. And by fix, I think what we mean is just being honest with you guys and telling you what's going on and what's happening and how we can help a little. There isn't a magic wand. There isn't a silver bullet to fix the past. There's not. I apologize for that. The 2% escalator is fairly common in CFDs, but it's also commonly disclosed to everybody to what it means. You've not had that privilege here in the past. It's been the commitment of the city manager and this group to be as transparent as we can with you guys. And I know you're not hearing everything that you want. But we're not going to stop. This isn't where it ends. This is the beginning. This is the first time somebody's actually come to you and said, we can save you some money. We won't stop looking at options. I won't. This group won't. That's why we're here. And we'll keep doing it. Sir?
Hi. I'm actually new to Beaumont, and I knew the financial situation I was getting into when I moved here. But in return of that, what I expect is I look at it looks like a new community, new buildings, it's growing, and I expect the growth that, me paying $3,500 a year plus would make the roads nicer, would build schools, would build fires. It'd be a nicer environment, and therefore the result of that would be the financial gain of my property values going up. But I'm disappointed in this meeting that not once have I heard anyone up there. Yeah, I know it's not a lot of you guys' area, but of what we're going to get back. And that was the greatest point. That exit at Cherry Valley that should be the first thing you look at for the city, because all these people in this room are paying over $3,500 a year to go home off that off-ramp, and it looks like that. And that's very disappointing. So we have all this money going out, and these are the people financing the city. As far as I'm aware from listening to this, we're financing, I don't know what, debt. Maybe we're financing debt. We're financing who knows what. I'm so disappointed right now because I see nothing coming back to me saying, hey, you're new here. We're glad. We know you're paying $3,500 plus a year, but look what it's going to be. Your property values are going to go up. The schools are going to get better than a 6 rating because of, what we're putting into that. But there's none of that. I haven't heard anything. Not even nothing.
Yeah, let me. I think I can expand. I don't want to steal Todd's thunder, but part of that workout plan that I discussed, one of the things that we've identified in looking backwards is there never was a capital improvement plan that the community or the staff developed and shared with the community. There was a master list of facilities. It was $200 million worth of anything and everything. It was very broad in terms of what it was and its definition. Through the recent work that we've done, and I know Amer's somewhere in this room, I assume, in the back. His job right now is to put together the CIP, which will identify specific projects like what you're talking about and get them funded in our plan. Without Melrose. We're still trying to do everything without Melrose going forward. So I know that project's come up. I know there's a couple other ones that'll come up. I'll let Todd speak about the timing of those. But you also remind me of something else. Katie touched on a little bit of it. So, Brian, if I get off track on the legal side of this, help me out here. When the rate and method is created for the CFDs themselves, there's a list of facilities that are supposed to be built as part of the assessment. And the issue probably here is the descriptions, and this is pretty, I wouldn't just say it's just Beaumont, I've seen it in other places, they're very vague. Street systems, water systems, sewer systems. It won't say specifically this street for this length. I see that a lot of places I go. The one unique thing about Beaumont, this is the only city I can think of, and I don't know if Katie or Brian or the individuals at Webb seen anything different, where there's one CFD for the whole city. Typically, each development has their own, and they have their own facilities they build. The genius, so to speak, behind the 93-1 CFD, in one essence, is it does allow you to use money from each improvement area throughout the district. If you disclose what you're going to do, it's a great idea because the whole community can benefit. Unfortunately, they never disclose to you how they're spending money from 19C in some other part of the town. We know that that's probably happened. And I think they designed 93-1 with that in mind. Oh, I have been. Well, we did. We did the reconciliation of it, and it went for facilities, like I said, throughout the community. But I think one of the challenges that we've seen in dealing with all of the different improvement areas, it went throughout the whole city. It didn't go specifically for where the neighborhood that you live in, per se. A lot of it just came in. So there was this master facility.
Hold on just a second. Let me address what you just said, because I think that's what
Well,
we're all...
let me finish one comment first.
It's to his comment that there's a fiduciary responsibility as to making sure that the monies that are paid in those, in those groups that are getting the monies back. And it's unacceptable to have it spread. Nobody's allowed to do that. So why is...
I'll let Brian speak, but I'm pretty sure, and I don't want to anger the group anymore, but I don't think it's illegal to do it. It just wasn't maybe morally right to do it.
If we think that the money is going to our area, then it is illegal. It is illegal that money is just spread out to wherever somebody decides to put the money because there is a faulty street in that area. That needs to be transparent, and I think that money should go back to us that have been paying at the higher rate. It's unheard of that people are okay. Well, we found it. But give it back to us, because we've been paying for years and years, and we don't want to fund other things. We want the things that we think we're paying for to be funded. It shouldn't be allowed to, you shouldn't be allowed to spread it out amongst the community. They're not paying the same fee that we're paying.
So,
other cities are able to operate without Belarus, and compared to Beaumont, and you look at the infrastructure and what's going on, and they're sustainable. Why is Beaumont barely sustainable, and we have all this extra money and paying double taxes?
I'm gonna address the woman's comment over here. So when the CFDs were formed, when the improvement areas formed, there was a list of facilities that were authorized to be financed. And as Mike said, that list was very broad. When there was a large amount of regional infrastructure, regional projects that were required in order to build your improvement areas, including trunk sewer lines and water lines from far away parts of the city that had to come in. That's not stuff you see readily from what you're doing. But those improvements went in. And there's also regional roadway improvements that had to go in order to benefit the properties.
Is everybody paying for that? That is my point.
Yeah, I cannot tell you here that everybody is equally paying for it.
We are not holding the city of Beaumont on our backs.
No, and one of the things, and you're correct, and one of the things that I don't like, and I'm not going to badmouth anybody that came before me, at all. But we've got a situation, and we're trying to provide the best that we can. I know it's underwhelming, and I knew that, and looking at those numbers, that I would want more. I would expect more too. The way that those funds were being utilized in the past, they were being swept into a bucket, and then that bucket was being used to draw off of, and they weren't budgeting in the way that we're looking to try to budget moving forward. The community, all y'all need transparency. These are your tax dollars. So I'm very sensitive to that.
But we're not paying the same amount.
Please let me finish. Let me finish. Please let me finish.
I understand that you are, taking care of everything from the general fund, but nobody else but this area is paying those type of fees. So that money needs to be refunded or paid down on the loan, what have you, but nobody else in the city of Beaumont is paying the same amount that we're paying. And that's our complaint. It's like, we found the money, but you need to continue to pay this amount. But you know what? Give us back what was spent out of the general fund and pay down that loan, and we're all even. Or charge everyone else in the city.
In moving forward, what we are working on are budget allocations for those CFD collections. So when we're looking at those PAYGOs, those particular funds, one of the things that we're talking to council about is, do you want to go ahead and return that off the assessment? So, if the council says, hey, we don't want to collect the PAYGO anymore, then that comes off. And really, I think that's, considering the situation and the financial structure of a lot of these IAs, that's where the biggest bang for the buck's going to come from. That's where your biggest bang may come from. And that's something that we need to discuss with council and see what they want to do. With regard to budgeting PAYGO dollars and looking at the best way, the most appropriate way to allocate those, then we're preparing budget models that are looking at that. And looking at what's in your particular IA, what kind of services are needed, and then how should those be allocated and distributed. There are some areas that have full park systems within them. There's other areas that have no park systems within them and maybe within the same subdivision. And so what's an appropriate way to be able to allocate those funds that go towards maintaining those things? In terms of going back and trying to draw dollars up from the prior and try to refund, I don't think we found that there's been any inappropriate use of those funds. Was it done in a way that was transparent? Was it done in a way that we can go back and tag an assessment to the allocation of those funds? No, I don't know that number. I don't have that. That's not how it was being accounted for. That's not how it was being tracked. I can't go back and find out what that was. But moving forward, we're looking to implement policies and programs to be able to show you this is what we collected from you, this is how it was apportioned, this is why. To the other question, I think to follow up on the capital side, what am I getting for my dollars? Brian had mentioned to the fact that, hey, we need to develop a CIP. It needs to look at transportation, public facilities. The West Side Fire Station has been a big issue. I mean, I've heard about it a lot since I've been here. We've got CFD dollars that come in. We've also got impact fees. We've got other sources that are coming in. And so we're looking to be able to program those types of things. There's parks improvements. There's other things that we've got to factor in and begin to look at. But again, that's not a plan and a strategy that's ever been prepared. So we're in the process of developing that. And so we can begin to present that back. And that's something that typically requires citizen input to go through that process. Because council's got to look at what are the identified needs of the city, of the citizens, what do they want, and how do we then look at strategies to finance moving forward.
Todd, I appreciate your answers, but we have other questions too. So if we can move this along before everybody has to go home and go to bed.
We're a fairly new resident to Beaumont. We lived in a small mountain community for 16 years, had better services in that small mountain community, and paid 1/10 of the taxes we're paying here. This is in California, within an hour drive from here. My question is, I understand that this group and the new city council are not the ones that got us into this mess. Okay? Our home has depreciated almost $10,000 in 1 year because of the Mello-Roos. And I'm sure everyone else has had that problem. My question is, it's my understanding that 2% per year is the maximum on Mello-Roos that can be charged. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And who negotiated that wonderful agreement for this community?
So that was agreed upon when the district was formed. So there was a vote that took place by the developer or property owner at the time. Typically what happens is there's a vote that's either held. There's less than 12 registered voters in the area. It's a landowner vote. So each property owner gets one vote per acre. In most of these cases, all these cases, there was a developer who owned the property. They came to the city. They formed the CFD. They voted on the CFD.
So it was a developer and someone with the city that
council
negotiated with the developer?
That is correct. So, and those rates were structured at that time to have that 2% escalator.
And who at the city negotiated with the developer? The individual?
Well, we don't know who that was that did it at
And why
the
do
time.
you not know who that was?
Well, I guess it would be city manager Alan Kapanicus at that time.
But it should be in your records, it would be in your minutes, it would be somewhere. My further question is, I hope someone here or relays it to the city council, is what our legal recourse is against either the city of Beaumont, the developer, or the prior council for misuse and misspent funds of all of these homeowners.
So I can't address your last statement, but what I can clarify for you is the 2%. That was approved when the district was formed.
Approved
Later
by
on,
whom?
bonds were sold that had, as mentioned a couple of times here this evening, bonds were sold that have an annual escalating debt service, so the city is obligated to maintain that annual 2%.
You have to understand, if I want to bring a lawsuit against someone, I have to know who I'm going to sue. I can name 100 different agencies, communities. I want to know who is responsible for the misuse
the bottom line is the city,
of all of their money. And don't double talk me, please.
I'm not double talking you. The city cannot provide you legal counsel, so that's a legal issue that.
I didn't ask you for counsel. I asked you for who negotiated. It would be in your records, your minutes somewhere.
Right. I think it was mentioned that the city manager at the time had negotiated that, I believe, and whoever else was on staff would have negotiated that at the time.
Okay, so you really can't provide us any assistance in...
I can't, off the cuff, I can't tell you. I don't know who all would have been involved with that, but we can go back and look at records. Should be
Could you then provide it to this group? I understand this is the third meeting out of 4, correct?
This is the first out of 4.
This is the first out of 4?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mm-hmm. We're in 17B, so everything you've said tonight doesn't affect us and may not affect us at all because we may move before you ever renegotiate our bonds. But in the meantime, my taxes are double what they should be.
I understand.
I'll let him go.
You know, I don't want to hammer you too much, Todd, because you are new, and I appreciate when you come into a mess, it's hard. So I do acknowledge that, and I respect you for what you're doing. And when I hear transparency, that's all we ask going forward is transparency. But part of transparency is where did the money go? And you guys are consultants. You look through all of this. I'm sure you could come up with a report on where the money went. Every dime of it, where it went. There was supposed to be specific things that this could be used for. So I could see an easy column saying it was used appropriately, it was used inappropriately. This is how much was spent. This is how much it went. If you are truly for transparency, I would say within 2 months, everybody sitting here should know where every last dime of my money and their money went. Is that unreasonable?
I can't remember when it was, sir, but I think I'm going to guess 6 months ago. We did a reconciliation of all the bonds, and it was at a council meeting. I don't care if that's on the website somewhere. There should be a report on the website.
And does it have it listed everything that it was used for? And
all
if it was
$264 million.
And if it was appropriate or inappropriate?
Well, I don't think we found anything inappropriate.
You didn't?
No.
Okay, good. If you could put on the city website where I can find that, I'm going to... All right, I appreciate that. What's that? It would have been helpful. The last thing I want to say is I'm as guilty as anybody else in not coming to the city council meetings. Last night I came to the city council meeting and there were 6 people sitting there. Do you think people really feel accountable to you and me when 6 people show up for a city council meeting? They don't. I can guarantee you if they have to hold that meeting in this room instead of that room over there, we're going to have a lot more accountability. And instead of hearing councilmen report as to what party or what they did over the last 2 weeks that they met the voters and glad-handed, we're going to start hearing results as to what my money and your money is being spent on. And that's what I expect in a city council meeting.
Yeah, I'll go. Is the 2% escalator on the basis, or is it year-on-year compounded?
It's compounded. Yeah, it's compounded.
So that's your 60%. The other question I have is, can you tell us how the property that was used for that was intended to be used for the school has now homes built on it? Can you tell us how that property went back to the developer? And just to let you know, the paper is here, and so your answers are kind of going to be broadcast to everybody. So let's see if we can get through this one more time. Where did the school property go, and who owns it?
Well, and I can't speak to whether that school property had been transferred ever to the school district. I don't know if the school district had accepted that property. The landowner, the developer, does own that property, or I guess that it's been purchased by a home builder, and so they've got the authority to be able to develop residential homes on that piece of property.
So where did the funds go from the property? Pay for that property that should have been, that was in our original contracts through Fairway Canyons that stated that property was going to be built as a school. We have contracts that state that the school was to be built, two of them, Tournament Hills and the Palmer School District, or school. So can you explain where that money went? It had to go to somebody. Who owned the property? As far as I know, it was owned by the city.
No, the city doesn't own that property. The city hasn't owned that property. The city did not sell that property. The city hasn't received any funds for that property.
But it was designated in our contracts as a school. That
Yeah,
we
I
paid for.
haven't, I haven't seen the contracts out there, so I can't speak to what's in your contract. I don't know what's in your purchase contract.
Okay, that's fine. I didn't expect you to know what they were. The other question I have is over the last 10 years, I've paid approximately $39,000 in Mello-Roos. How much of the debt that's associated to my specific home is now paid off? And are you going to have the apportionments for prepayment done before the middle of the year? Or is it going to be first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, calendar year, not fiscal year? When can we expect to have the numbers? We've already paid $40,000. How much do I owe you guys to get out of this? And I do want to make one more comment for the loan to value. The reason your LTV is so bad is because our properties are worth half of what they were when we bought them. My $640,000 home is now $320,000. So there's no question about that 16 LTV is now an 8.
Sure. So it sounds like I got a couple questions in there. I'll try to address each of them for you. So with regards to how much is a lien on your property from the bonds. So with a CFD, there's no lien recorded against the property that has an amount, like an assessment district or your mortgage. What's recorded against the property is a special tax. The rate and method of apportionment that we mentioned before, the tax is recorded against your property. So to answer your question with regards to how much is on there, it's a calculation it's a moving target. We don't know what that is. What we do know is that it's a process to actually calculate that payment each time a property owner requests it. So I believe what you're referring to of having it available to look at was a process that the city had historically practiced. They had put the rates up on the website, and anybody could look at it at any time. That is not a process that is acceptable for a CFD. So the city took them down, and they've been reviewing that policy. So in doing the review, they also know that we're making some changes, and so they're delaying the release of an actual prepayment process until we complete what we've tried to accomplish here tonight. And then after we get a full understanding and direction we're going to go, then that process would be opened back up with the new kind of direction for removing future facilities. After the bonds have been refunded and we know what's outstanding and where, you would see that available. What that process will look like, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I can tell you it's not likely that you would have a dollar amount up on the website any longer that you could use. There may be a policy that the city comes up with to give you an estimate, and then there's a formal process that follows suits afterwards. But going back to the old way is not something that is acceptable, and it's not something the city wants to put onto the property owners. With regard to your value to lien and the value of your property, there's things, and I'm just speculating here because I wasn't here when they formed these districts. Really, Mr. Forbath explained this a little bit, and I'm just going to touch on it. Depending on the time in history that these developments were completed, in about 2007, I believe, was when the 19 improvement areas were really booming in development. 2006 area, markets were high, the values of the homes were high, and so that allowed for more capacity for the tax. And so when you're comparing your $600,000 when you bought years ago to today, that is not being eroded by the CFD tax. That is the value of the real estate market, and that the county is the one that actually adjusts that year to year. It's done through appraisals.
That's where you're mistaken. The erosion has come from the fact that no one wants to buy a home in Beaumont because of the Mello-Roos. Again, we're not foolish people. We've been around the block a lot of times with the council. The fact that the LTV is so bad is because our basis is just eroded because of the Mello-Roos. You tell somebody, hey, I'm from Beaumont. Oh, you guys pay all those Mello-Roos. I'd never live there. One last comment is, now, I won't even make an additional comment, but we're tired of being fooled by this. So you have approximately 700 homes and $24 million worth of debt. That's $35,000 or $35,000 worth of debt per home, approximately. Assign that debt to us. Let us pay it in a second mortgage, whatever. Let's get you out of our pants, because we're tired of you guys being in our pockets, restructuring debt so that Piper Jaffray and various other organizations are making lots of money. They're consulting. They're making a pile of money. So I'm going to turn this over to the other gentleman. He's been patient.
Thank you. My name's Luis, and I just want to kind of echo some of these things. I came out here because my property taxes are going up this year, and I'm like, okay, I'm new in the community, just like the other gentleman. And I'm pretty ignorant of some of the things that went on in the past that I'm learning as I go. I'm kind of a newer homeowner as well. And I'm thankful that you guys are here to explain some of these things, because I'm not really a math person, per se. So I do appreciate, because now I'm more informed, and that's what this is all about. But the other thing is, I'm very disappointed, because I was kind of looking for what many others were looking for, is a pretty good reduction in our property taxes. Because I brought mine, just like someone said to bring, and total, including Melrose, I'm paying 82 and some change, 8,200 something a year. So, and I'm in 19C, so to save me, correct me if I'm wrong, that $211 a year.
19C was about 523. But if I could just bring up a point real quick, it's been mentioned many times, and I may not be understood by the community.
Yeah.
Beaumont, the city of Beaumont, is only responsible for 2 line items on your property tax bill. They're responsible for the CFD 93-1 for the facilities and the services. Every other line item you see on there, including the ad valorem, the property tax, or the general tax, that has nothing to do with the city. They have no control over it whatsoever. That is nothing that the city can control. So when you're quoting your $8,400 property tax bill, that is not the city's responsibility. They're only responsible for a portion of it.
Okay.
So I just want to make that clarification.
Well, the point is, it's flipping outrageous. The amount of property taxes, it's just out of control. It's off the charts high. I did research and I talked to neighbors, and it's probably the highest in the whole country. The whole country. And like, where is the whole flipping country? Where is this money going? Because I got a dog park down the street. Hallelujah. There's nobody in the flipping dog park. Ever. On the weekend, there's a couple of dogs. I'll be there once in a while. You know, I have 2 dogs. But that's all we got for real? Okay? Before I lived here and moved here, I lived in Menifee. I lived in Heritage Lake. And my payment was $500 lower with a higher percentage rate. $500 lower. That's crazy. And kind of like some of the other people said, we're new to the area. We thought a nice growing community. It's quiet, conservative. It's up and coming. We expected to see a lot more, and to hear for 12 years, 14 years, whatever, nobody's seeing anything. That you can't do that. You can't do that to people. So I'm begging you and pleading with you, as some of the other guys are saying. I'm just going to echo. You got to think outside the box. The other gentleman that went up a couple times, he's trying to give you guys something, because you got to think outside the box, because this tiny little bit of tax cut is not enough. And like the other lady was saying, you can't have other people paying for paying more than everybody else for the same things. It can't work that way. And that's what rouses people up, is because, and it's not your fault, but you're rousing everybody up because we're starting to see that we're getting ripped off. And Americans hate that. Boston Tea Party, we hate that. We're not going to stand for that. So we need to fix this. You got to think outside the box, like crazy outside. Like, bring some 19-year-old grad students up in here and figure some stuff out, because this old school way of thinking isn't going to cut it. You got to think outside the box. How are we going to do this? And then the other thing I want to say is, I used to bump my wife because the neighbors would talk, and sometimes people would come over. Yeah, we're going to have to move. Now I'm going to have to go home and tell them that, and have a real conversation with my wife, because she loves where we live. We got the dark espresso hardwood floors up in our house. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to have to tell her, honey, we might have to leave, because ain't nothing happening too soon except that we can count on our taxes going up. And that's not good. We can't do that. You got to think outside the box because there's no way on God's green earth our property taxes should be going up. They need to be going down significantly, and you need to spread the wealth out. You need to figure something out. They can't go up. Okay, they just can't. And we can't stand for it as a community. There's no way on God's green earth. We shouldn't be just sitting back being cool with the fact that they're going to go up 2% a year or whatever it is. They can't. It's just not right. It just can't happen. So, thank you.
I'm an original homeowner here in Fairway Canyon, and I think a lot of us were misled when we bought our homes. We were not told of that 2% escalator. We were lied to on the amount we were going to be paying on property taxes. I pay $10,000 a year where I live, and because of the escalator, in about 5 years, my payment's going to go up $400 more a month. That's not fair. We've tried to refinance. We've done things to try to keep us in our home. But this 2% escalator is going to have, a lot of people are going to have to leave because of it. And I think that we've paid our dues. I have paid my dues, paying over, since I've been in Beaumont, over $8,000 plus a year in taxes, and which I've seen nothing for, except for that park down the street. And then you're telling me that some of the money that we did pay has gone to pay for services somewhere outside of my community. It's not right. That money needs to be given back to us. I think that as our city manager, you need to go to the council and express to them how this 2% escalator is killing the people who work so hard for their homes. I didn't move here to lose my home. I love where I live. And it's just not fair. You're talking about refinancing the bonds. When I refinanced my house, the other terms went away with my refinance. Why can't that 2% escalator go away with the refinancing of the bonds?
So I think that's been explained pretty significantly at this point. The option is available. Council is aware of the 2% escalator that is, for lack of a better term, plaguing a lot of the improvement areas. As has been mentioned, it is a common tool. It's not unique to Beaumont. It's used throughout the state. The problem with refinancing and removing that 2% escalator is what was illustrated earlier. You certainly do that. You'll immediately have a tax increase because your level debt service has to cover what would have been done annually over a long period of term. Escalating it towards the end needs to be done total across every year. So you have to have an increase.
What do you mean what would have been done? As far as what would have been done?
So, Carrie, I don't know if you can put that slide back up, but essentially you still have to pay the same amount of debt over the same period of time. So if you're removing the later years, it would be escalating annually. You're going to get more, you'll have a higher tax to pay more debt during that time. You have to smooth that out. So they'll create the level debt service. But when you create that level debt service, it costs you more initially and your savings is delayed. So you wouldn't get a reduction in your tax rate for 7 to 10 years, depending on the actual numbers. And so that's what's illustrated on that table on the right. The orange is your debt service. That's your annual payment. So if you compare it to the table on the left, where it would have been just over $1,500, now it's just under $2,000. So you immediately have a tax increase year one. The blue line is your savings. So if you look on the left, you get immediate savings with the annual escalated tax service, debt service. You get nothing in the beginning until the several years go by. So the council could do it, but you would have to stay in your home 7 years before you would get it. I think what you're asking is,
at this rate, in 7 years, I might not be able to afford my home because of the escalator. I don't understand how.
Right. Well, I'm not really sure how else to explain it. You mentioned that you weren't aware of when you bought the house.
No, a lot of people were lied to. So, and you know what? The new homes that are going up, the D.R. Hortons, and I don't know the name of the other, the Woodside, whatever. The council is kissing developers' butts. What they did, I was at that meeting when they agreed to lower the tax rate because they want people to buy the houses. They want people to move in there. But still, you know, us in 19C, we're paying high fees. It's not right. So, some way you guys need, city manager, you need to go to the council and let them know that we're pissed off. This isn't fair. Something has to be done. Those people will benefit from the pool that I go to, have the gym, have the dog park, all the things that I've been paying for, and they're paying a cheaper amount. And the council reduced their tax rate to have people move in there and have those developers sell those houses. That's not fair to us. That's
I'm not really
I just would like for my mortgage payment to stay the same. I don't want it to keep going up because I don't want to have to move. I love my home. I love my neighbors. But at the rate that things are going, every year my house payment is going up by $100. It's...
So I'm not sure if I missed a question that you would like me to address.
I want you guys to go to the council members and tell them that whatever little savings I'm going to get a year, $300 and something. How's that a savings for me? Because of the escalator, my payments are still going up. Something more has to be done than whatever you guys are trying to do. If you want us to be happy, if you want us to be, stay in this community, help us out. We've done enough for Beaumont, paying the amount of taxes that we've paid. We need some help.
Yes, ma'am. And that is information, like I said, we're going to report back to council. We'll be providing them feedback from this meeting, so they'll know. And council understands the sensitivity, and some of them are subject to the 2% escalator, so they understand that. And so that's an option, and we've discussed. It's been modeled. It's been looked at. So, again, that's communication we'll take back to council.
And that's important. That's killing people that live in 19C, is that escalator. And it's not fair. Because we bought under false pretenses. It's not fair.
Okay. And I'm sorry, got another question. But we'll communicate that to council. Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment. I think the evening began, Todd, with you explaining the reason the council was not here was so that all of you could take feedback to the council from us. So I just would like to make a comment as feedback, and I'm not trying to speak for anybody else, but in the first place, I know that none of you were here when the developers dumped this debt on us. So I know none of you did it, and we understand that. And I am grateful that an effort is being made to address it. But for me, I'd like the City Council to hear that the effort that's being made is woefully inadequate.
Okay. We'll communicate that. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to comment on the huge inequity of allowing a new development not to have the same assessments that we who have been here for years have been paying. Who's looking out for us, the people that have been here all these years, paying this massive amount of money? Who's looking out for us? Who allowed that decision to go forth?
That is a situation, like I mentioned earlier, that property was originally scheduled for the elementary school site. And that property was exempted from the facilities assessments that were talked about tonight. So that property was conveyed to a developer or a home builder who now has the right. They've got the right to be able to develop that. Now, the properties that are sold, the pricing of that, would typically include the cost of the development for those homes. So when you purchase those homes in that situation, the cost should reflect a recapture of the infrastructure expense.
Why couldn't the city have placed an assessment on those homes to make up for the inequities of the rest of us that are having to pay it? Yeah. Why didn't you assess them that to make up?
because we didn't have the authority to be able to do that in that situation. It's already exempted from that section. They have the right to develop. They have the entitlements to develop that property.
Why can't we make a new law that new development has to make up and repay the people who have been here all this time for this great inequity?
Again,
and the streets, the lights, everything.
There's a process, of course, for development, and there's zoning. There's the process. There's requirements for subdivisions. There's the types of streets, types of infrastructure necessary for that project. In a scenario like we're discussing, the property when it's developed, the developer is going to bear that cost. They're going to carry that cost. If they have to borrow money, if they bring in investors to do it, whatever structure they choose, they develop it. Then whatever they've sunk into that cost to develop that lot goes back into that.
Let me make
part
a
of that
comment
process
first.
includes
That empty field, if it remained empty, it would have been a better use to us than the new houses that are there.
Let me finish. The other aspect is there are developer impact fees that are paid by the developer also to help offset their broader impact. So the streets, public facilities, parks, there's impact fees that are applied to those that are paid back in. They don't go to the general fund. They go to an impact fee program, and it's a separate fund. It's a separate program. It goes into a capital plan that is. It could be part of the general fund. It could be a section. So anyway, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there's assessments, there's impacts that are assessed against the property. Those are reflected in fees that get paid and collected. And so that is a fair share distribution. In the CFDs, the developer had impact fees. They had other infrastructure improvements that they made. They then, through the CFD, were able to sell bonds that reimburse them for that cost. So when they sell the house, that cost is being recouped through the bond sales that occurred versus selling the property with those captured costs within it.
Well, this developer that's making the money off the sale of those houses now, or is it the same developer that was there when the streets were built and the electricity and the sewer and all that was put in?
Yeah, it should be. I believe so. Argent Communities, yes.
The other question is, our Melrose is the number one problem we have in this area. My house, I have a house in Yucaipa that's 2,000 square feet. It's the same value as my house here that's 3,500 square feet. The reason for that is the Melrose. What is the city doing? Is it exploring other options to get that Melrose down? For instance, like a hotel tax, a vice tax, something like that, to help us residents here that have been suffering from this onerous Melrose tax for all these years.
And again, we're here because council said this is an issue. And they said, they brought a team together and said, what can be done to address that situation? So that's what we're presenting to you tonight. The city has a requirement through development agreements to have provided reimbursements to developers, and it's reflected through the bonds that were sold for improvements. And so in that process in establishing the CFD, there were rates that were established to cover that obligation. And so those are there. That's part of the obligation that's been assumed there. And so in assessing those rates, we have to go through a rate model mechanism, which was described a little bit earlier, to establish how that's going to get paid. So unfortunately, the situation, this is the process. This is the methodology by which that gets addressed. And so what we're looking at is in 19C, the others we talked about, we can't even do the refinancing yet. In refinancing that, under the ways that we talked about, this is what we're estimating that return to be. And understand that people aren't satisfied with that you need and you want to see more, but we're trying to maximize that, and we're trying to look at the best ways we can restructure that to maximize the savings that are there.
The refinancing is one thing, but what else is the city doing besides that? As I suggested, like a hotel tax.
Well, we already have
tax.
a hotel tax. We have a transit occupancy tax right now that's collected. Those are restricted funds. Those are what they call head and bed dollars. So there's an additional sales tax that's collected. That's a head and bed. So that goes to specific special event and marketing efforts for the community. The other challenge, and I think the question came up earlier, is we're adding all this value to the city. Why aren't we funding more city services? Well, a lot of these subdivisions are newly annexed in, or were annexed in as they were developed. When that happens, there's a master tax sharing agreement that's in place with the county, with Riverside County. Riverside County keeps 75% of the property taxes moving forward. So the city's portion of it, even though the city's taking all the responsibility for services within that subdivision, for streets, for animal control, for police, for fire, all those things, only 25% of that tax is coming to the city to offset that. The balance goes to the county for everything else that is happening. So, that's another key factor that affects the service moving forward for newly developed and newly annexed properties. So, but alternative sources of funding, looking at the hotel, that's there. Looking to try to maximize all of the revenue sources, are things that we're looking at as part of that. I'm sure.
It's a matter that the people you should be mad at are the developers, not the city. They should have paid all those funds up front and added $100,000 to your house. You see, $3,000 a year for 30 years is $90,000. They theoretically should have paid all that up front and then added it to your house. But we didn't want that because you wouldn't have bought a $700,000 house. So they found a way to get around that. And this is what we're going to end up suffering with by accepting a subpar value for your house and then having to pay for it over 30 more years. The other thing you need to look at is that for all of you that belong to the Homeowners Association, and I know you do, if you looked at this year's financial statement, there's a $10 million loan that showed up this year that's never been there before to reimburse the developer for building our clubhouse. You need to look at that. Don't let that stuff go by. It was never there before. This year, the $10 million shows up. These people are these are the firemen. The fire's already over. They're trying to come back in and set something up. These are deals that were set in concrete because some developer decided it was a good idea and convinced the city that the only way that we can build up here is if you allow us to have subpar value houses by putting the money underground and charging them out over 30 years without them thinking about it. Be mad at Standard Pacific, be mad at all those other guys that sold you those houses and didn't tell you about it. But don't be mad at these people. These people are just trying to handle a bad situation. I mean, they took over for people that have been indicted. They should be in jail. They never will, but they should be. But they put the money in one big pot and spent it everywhere. You see? And so, yes, we did, in fact, pay for streets down in downtown city that probably should have been out in ours, but the law said then that's how it works out. So these guys, the best they're going to give you is the $30 a month if they're able to refinance them at any kind of a right level. That's the best you can hope for. You can go home tonight, be mad, and sell your house all you want. But there's nothing more these guys can do for that. All that stuff was set in concrete in 2004 and 2007. And we're stuck with that. And for those of you that bought in later, I'm sorry for you. But I watched my house go from $500 to $250 from 2007 to 2008. And now we're creeping back up. We're almost back up to 350 now. So we're just stuck. But don't take it out on these guys. They're doing the best they can. And there's not a lot they can do. They're hobbled by rules that were established and crooks that work together. I mean, read about that, who is it, the Colonials. You know, those guys are still getting ready to try to go to jail. All that stuff worked out the same. Those guys worked out here, there, and there. Developers do that all the time. We were just taken advantage of, and we can be mad at these guys, but none of them were there when it happened, maybe with the exception of the one guy, and he left. But he was mad too. Don't be upset with them.
So you've mentioned a few times for restructuring. So other cities do have Melrose. Is it considering, the growth of Beaumont and the potential of where we are here as a city now to compare ourselves to other cities that already have a Melrose? So if you're restructuring to maybe manage the money better, that some other cities already developed that.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things that Michael Bush with Urban Futures has helped us with also is to begin developing strategies and policies for how to manage the Melrose programs. And so, there's certain things included in that, such as annual review, periodic evaluation, benchmarks for when we should then go back and try to restructure for some additional savings. So we're looking at that. We're starting to develop those policies and programs that are there. And then the other thing, which is most important, is to, again, look at that budgeting and that cash allocation portion of that. So when we're taking in dollars, I want to be able to come back to you in the next budget and say, you say, where did my money go? I say, this is how we allocate it. This is what we budgeted, and this is where it was allocated to for those expenses. So, and to me, that's a big part of the frustration I think that everybody has certainly on the citizens, on the council, to say, hey, we need to do a better job of communicating how we're using your money. So,
and I get that. You've said that multiple times. But my point is, if there's other cities already that already have Melrose, that are already managing their money better, are you looking at them for that infrastructure as a comparison to move forward in a better way to better manage the money? Because somebody already did that work and research for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, we are. And even to that extent, we've got experts that are here that are helping us work through that as well. So, yes, we are doing that. Okay. Yes, best practices is what we're looking at.
Hi. So I think when you spoke to us, you kept saying it's like your situation. And it's not really our situation to come up with this money because we already paid for it. So I think the city needs to take accountability. And like the other gentleman said, maybe look at other ways to bring in that money. That's because we have paid for all of that. Pretty much the city of Beaumont, we've paid for the upgrades for them, not for our community where we live in our parcel or in our area. Also, you said that there was no misappropriation of funds, but yes, you need to take accountability for that because the funds weren't spent where they were supposed to be. So, they should have been spent where we live, but they weren't. Even though we're paying for the taxes, they weren't spent on us. So that, to me, is a misappropriation of funds. Another question I had was, I feel that every time there's a problem in Beaumont, that I feel like I'm the rich uncle and that I have the deepest pockets and that it's easy to point the finger at us. So I maybe consider some rental, like a city implementing a rental tax, because there's a lot of people that live in the old part of Beaumont that are renting. And they use all of our facilities, all of our schools. I think that's the thing that upsets me the most is we pay high taxes, and our school, we have 4,000 students at our Beaumont High School, and it would have been nice to have another high school for our side of the town, but 4,000, a lot of those needs of those students are not being met because we have so many housing projects here. So my question to you was, you mentioned that the tax rate, and you said in 7 years, There's going to be a refund for that, the little bar thing that you mentioned. So if we do that, you know how you said that if there's you end up saving money, the one that increases over time. You said do you remember that graph, the one that she put up? So there's a flat one, and then there's the one that increases. And you said in 7 years, you'll have a savings, right? I think that's what you mentioned. So how do we know that in 7 years you're not going to do it again? And can we get that in writing? Or, is there going to be a guarantee that we will never have another 2% increase rate with another bond issue? Or
for most of these improvement areas, there's no remaining authorization to issue additional new bonds, like new money bonds to pay for new projects.
Yes.
The only bonds that can be issued are for refunding purposes for savings. So the answer is that is a covenant that will be made to bond owners and residents.
So in 7 years we're done?
No, that's not 7 years we're done. It's just there cannot be new bonds that are issued that will increase your taxes. This is what you have right now is the highest it's going to be in terms of that profile of the debt service going up. If we're able to refund bonds for savings, that'll lower it, and it won't ever go higher than what we lower it to.
So that scares me because that's an if, and so you're saying that it could just remain there, like stay up there.
Well, if we're not able to execute this refunding plan that we've talked about tonight, then your taxes stay at that level.
So, and my last question is, you said that there's 4 other meetings. Are you talking about the 4 meetings with the other communities, and are we welcome to attend those meetings also?
Yeah, there's 3 other meetings, and they're with other communities. The way that the city staff grouped it was sort of by geographic area, and I think the meetings are open to the public for anybody who wants to come, and those meetings will kind of like we went through the scenario of the savings for your improvement areas here. Okay. Those meetings will be identified for those improvement areas that are invited to that meeting, but they're open to the public. Anybody's welcome to come.
So anybody can come from
Yeah,
any
it's
community?
an open meeting like this. Anybody's eligible to come, allowed to come.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Oh.
Hi. I think for me, I won't speak for anyone else, but I've lived in my house, first owner, love my house, was lied to by Standard Pacific. But this situation has always been, this is our problem. And the city is talking about our problem, and we owe this debt. And I understand the concept of that. But at some point, when the FBI raids our city and the people who made these bonds are in jail or should be in jail, the city needs to take responsibility and say, we are going to partner with you to try to get these paid down. Whether it be with, I heard some ideas of hotel taxes, different things. I don't know any of that stuff. But the city has got to team up with us to make this better. This is not our problem. We did not create this problem. We are left with this problem. The city has got to take responsibility to say, we are so sorry this happened to you. We are taking responsibility, and we are going to help you pay this down.
You guys about ready to close up? We were talking about sources of paying off the loan. So one is from within the future facilities fee, and I'm hearing other people talk about other sources of revenue, maybe from city taxes and whatnot. One question I want to have is, I'm sure a lot of, knowing the culture of many of the people, in terms of taxation, they would be against raising taxes. But if you were to raise taxes to pay off $200 million, like for the dedicated purpose of just paying off the debt, what would the process be? And then my final point is, on these new issue books, which the bond world keeps away from us, I noticed in ours that the interest rate jumps up to 5%. In all your charts, everything looks like the same. I'd really like to see you put that on the board for everyone. Put that on there. And also, if you could, this is kind of really nerdy, but faster. What do I mean? Let's go faster. I think that a lot of people work with spreadsheets. If you could put that, rather than on paper, put it in a spreadsheet. So like when we're doing a mortgage calculator and we're recalculating, do that so we could get different scenarios right there, right now. We remove the 2% escalator, we can immediately see the change in our the total amount we'll pay for, in our case, the $19 million, or on a per parcel basis. I'm glad I can put this on the record. I really appreciate you doing this. I understand that to have this kind of crowd, I know how important this is for the community, that we opened up the gym. So also, for the property tax, if you can work with the county assessor and maybe ask them to show a balance owed on a per parcel basis, because right now our payoffs are like running around $55,000 per parcel. Just as a tiny little service, just have the county assessor or the county, whoever does that, who issues the tax bill, to just show, here's your current balance. Okay, you're 10 years into this. Well, your payoff was $55,000. Now it's only $25,000. I think it's something we can all understand, but just make it so we can do it more real time. Again, thank you for putting up this forum. Thank you.
Like I said, when I bought my home, I knew about the 2%. I knew everything I was getting into. But what I don't understand, and maybe there might have been a thing up there that said, and this is referred to as debt quite often, and my last statement was, what are you doing with the money? Is this money already gone? Like, when the developer, made these arrangements, did they get that money up front to build the infrastructure, whatever they had, and now we're just paying off the debt that's already spent? Should we not expect to see anything from the next 20 years of payments we're going to make?
Yeah, the bonds, all the proceeds of the bonds have been spent.
Yeah. So we're all arguing about what are you doing with the money. Money's gone. It went to the developer, right? It's gone.
The money went to go pay for infrastructure, went to go reimburse the developer for improvements they put in, etc. Yes, it's right. Been spent.
So our next 20 years of these payments we should not be expecting to see anything from it, right?
Yeah, you're essentially paying off the debt that's been incurred for the improvements that were constructed.
Right. And then my other question, I just don't. I'm in 19A, and my home was built 10 or 11 years ago, but it's my understanding they started making payments on the CFD only 2 years ago. Is that accurate?
I don't. Rich, help me on that. You have more of the history of it. But the 19A issued bonds a long time ago. There were some new bonds that were issued more recently that refunded those bonds. And that's one of the issues, is because the bonds were issued within the last 2 or 3 years. They have, as we've discussed tonight, there's this call protection period that the bonds are not refundable for usually a 10-year period from when they're issued. And so your 19A is not going to be refundable for savings for several years.
I don't care about the savings. Okay. It's a 20-year bond, right? I think it's the assessor told me it was a 20-year bond.
So the original issues was 30-year, but when they refund it, they're just refunding for the remaining term. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's got about 12 years left.
It has 18 years left.
18 years,
but did they just start making payments on it 2 years ago? I wasn't here.
No. So there was debt that was issued years ago.
10 years ago.
That debt ran for 10 years. They refunded it, and now you're seeing the newest bond. It cashed out. It's kind of like if you refinance your house, you start with a mortgage, and,
right?
And then you start over.
The people I bought the home from 2 years ago, they said their mortgage went up, or their taxes because of the CFD went up. Their monthly went up $200 a month. I called the tax office. They told me it's a 20-year bond. It expires in 18 years. So I do the math and I go, obviously this bond payment started 2 years ago.
No. It was a 30-year bond that was originally issued. So they may have been misinformed when they.
So is there a reason that it would have went up 2 years ago, $200 a month?
So the annual escalator goes up every year. So that,
but 2 years ago, $200 a month. I'm not talking. We're talking. I mean, all this other stuff. We're talking 18 years. She said $800 a month or whatever. It's $100 a month or $150. But
I don't know if you're referring to your total tax bill going up $200 or the CFD tax. But the tax will escalate annually by 2%. Your annual property tax will go up also by roughly 2%.
Okay, and so this is part of the problem, because the homeowner I bought the home from, they said 2 years ago because of the CFD they started paying $200 a month more. When I call the tax office, I try to get all the information I can about the CFD because I'm an informed buyer. You don't want to go through a real estate transaction with me because I read every line. I knew about every one of these dollars before I bought the home 7 days ago. And I'm hopeful for the city that things will get better, right? I have 2 young kids. I'm not young, you know. I mean, I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. But I call the tax office and I try to get information about it. She tells me it's a 20-year bond that started 2 years ago. That was word for word what she said. And it makes sense. If it started 2 years ago, it's a 20-year bond. It has 18 years left. That's what it says, and that's what it is. So it's not on our tax bill. It doesn't say when it expires, when it started. It doesn't say, you know, any information. I can't even get any information. I called the tax office today to try to get information. I can't get anything. So, you know, these people say they're lied to. I'm sure they signed a dotted line, and in the small print, it was very clear in the small print, if you want to call it very clear, whatever. So everyone signed a contract here saying they would pay it. So it's, you know, it's not, I agree, it's not your fault, and people didn't read the small print. But at the same time, I can't even get the information. Shouldn't it be clear if it's a 20 or 30-year bond? It seems a little confusing even here.
I can't address who you spoke with before and the seller, the information they gave you. What I can do is I can get your information. I'll give you a call tomorrow, and I can tell you exactly, answer all your questions specifically to your property and give you the history.
I would appreciate that. And are we all looking like, could there be another CFD come along here in 5 years? All of a sudden another one pops in, or what?
So the CFDs will continue with development as long as the city wants to use CFDs in there. There's no plan rolled out, but I mean, it is a possibility. I can't speak for... Oh, in your specific improvement? No,
yes.
No. These would be new developments. There's no property at all. For your properties, no. There's no additional CFD. There's no additional taxes that would be applied to the property.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate the information.
Yep.
Could I move we adjourn?
Agreed.
Let's take those and promise we'll be as brief as we can, but we do need to wrap up.
There's nobody in line.
Okay. Oh, no. Yeah. You betcha. So any last questions or comments? Again, if there's additional comments you have, we'd love to get your comment sheets and so we can try to get that information pulled and address that as well. So, all right. Thank you all. Y'all have a good evening. Safe trip home.